to register for the workshop by the end of the week. So once again, thank you for attending today's event. And now it is my pleasure to introduce to you our first speaker for today, the Executive Director of the UNWTO, Mr. Manuel Butler. Mr. Butler.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Jill. Good morning, everyone from Madrid, the HQ of the UNWTO in Spain. Thank you for joining us in these 2 days workshop on tourism statistics organized jointly with the Caribbean Tourism Organization. I hope you are safe and well in these difficult times. I am very glad about this workshop because we have the opportunity to share the expertise on statistics of different member states of the Caribbean, such as the Bahamas, Grenada, Trinidad and Tobago, Antigua and Barbuda, and Belize. Hearing and learning from them is key for UNWTO, and then especially in these difficult times that we have to focus more and more on not leaving behind anybody. And the most of the states, Caribbean states, are SIDS with a high dependence from international tourism. They deserve us this kind of actions. Understanding the basic of tourism statistic and the tourism satellite account, that's key in order to use for their policies, especially in this shock that we are living during the COVID-19. We are living a historic time as the COVID-19 has caused an unprecedented shock worldwide, almost in a synchronic manner. COVID has highlighted the importance of tourism globally and especially for countries of the Caribbean area. Vaccine developments are a positive news, but the recovery will still take time due to the challenges related with its rollout and the impact of the economic damage of the pandemic. On the positive side, there are signs of significant pent-up demand, which translate into increased booking levels when such restrictions are lifted, while the sector has seen unprecedented levels of government support, which should be taken as an opportunity to accelerate the transition into a more sustainable, resilient, and inclusive sector. The UNWTO is working very closely with other international organizations and with all the member states in order to accelerate, to find a solution and accelerate to building back the tourism. The coming 3-4 years will be central to the future of the tourism sector based on mobility and intercultural social exchange has been one of the most affected by the current crisis, coming to a halt by mid-March when countries around the world impose national lockdowns and close their borders to fight the spread of virus. And we are in a similar situation again a year thereafter. This year, challenges have further magnified many of the problems at the root of the Sustainable Development Goals, while accelerating the need for change action. There has been a change in paradigm. The COVID-19 crisis should be an opportunity to rethink tourism relationship with nature, societies, and people in line with the 2030 Sustainable Development Agenda. We need new solutions that address both our social and environmental challenges, two streams that are now converging, as for example, climate crisis leads to forced migration. The purpose of business will be adopted in an accelerated way in the next years ahead worldwide, where the social impact is added in equal terms to return and risk by the business decision makers. Building back a better tourism will require new and better indicators and tools to measure impact. That's why, in this sense, we should address two very important milestones, especially the measuring the sustainability in the tourism, the MST, that will be touched during this 2-day workshop. And we will be presented and hopefully approved by the UN Statistics Department next year, 2022. This workshop is therefore crucial for establishing how this can be monitored by measuring tourism, and not only in its economic dimension, but also from the social and environmental perspective. I hope and I ensure this workshop will be help the CTO countries in recovery and coming back to tourism in a better way. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Manuel, for that excellent introduction. Thank you very much, Faye, also for clarifying all the housekeeping rules of the workshop today. I welcome everyone. Thank you. I'm very happy to be here in this event. I'm very thankful to the CTO also for making this possible as well. I think this is a very needed event. I think it's an excellent initiative, and I hope we can create some traction in terms of statistics in tourism in the Caribbean. I think this is we will have the opportunity to discuss a lot of issues on this subject. So without further ado, I think we have a very tight program today. So I'll get started right away. We'll start, I think, as Faye mentioned, you can download the program from the chat window. As you can see, session 2, which is the one we're going to go into now, on how can UNWTO support the Caribbean countries in the field of statistics. So I'll make a short presentation on that. I will share now my screen. Perfect. So I'll talk a little bit about the activities that UNWTO has been conducting in the field of tourism statistics. I'll talk a bit about the mandate of the UNWTO in this field and the different areas of work in which we normally support support countries in this field. So the mandate comes from a mandate that comes to the UNWTO from the UN, from the United Nations, which recognizes the World Tourism Organization as the appropriate organization to collect, to analyze, publish, to standardize, and to improve the statistics of tourism, and to promote the integration of these statistics within the sphere of the UN system. So the UN is the entity within the United Nations system. The UNWTO is the entity within the UN system that focuses on tourism statistics. From here, 3 of the main pillars of work of the UNWTO on statistics come. First one is one of the, as I mentioned before, is one of the mandates is to standardize statistics. So the first pillar is the creation of standards, the development of internationally agreed standards for the measurement of tourism in its different dimensions. From here also comes the mandate to improve, so capacity building and helping countries in implementation of these standards through 3 main types of activities, which I will touch upon in more detail later on. Technical assistance in countries, regional capacity building initiatives, and also to develop material that can support the improvement of tourism statistics. And finally, also on the data front, to collect, analyze, and publish data related to tourism. So these are the main 3 standards, 3 pillars of work that come from the mandate that the UNWTO has. Within these 3 standards, there's also cross-sectional topics, 3 main topics, which are organized in the following manner. The first core topic is on what we call basic tourism statistics, visitors, industries, physical flows of like I said, of visitors, arrivals, expenditure as well, tourism industries, the demography of the sector, etc. A second topic, which is more with the economic contribution of tourism to the national economy. This is mostly related to what we call the tourism satellite accounts. And finally, a third topic, which is more recent, I would say, but is probably incredibly relevant currently, which is measuring the sustainability of tourism. We'll have a separate section on this at the end of the day today. It's on item 5. You can see it on the program. So I will not touch upon this third topic so much in my presentation because we'll focus on that later on. I will touch more on topic 1 and topic 2. So in terms of the first pillar, the standards, you're probably very familiar with them. The first standard for what we call the core topic 1, which is the basic tourism statistics, are the international recommendations for tourism statistics. These kind of give the main concepts and definitions that are needed to measure tourism in national context. I will go further into this later on during the day as well. In terms of the economic contribution, the second core topic that I mentioned, the main standard is the Tourism Satellite Account Recommended Methodological Framework, which establishes the way in which tourism satellite accounts need to be compiled. As I mentioned as well, on the third topic, currently there's no standards, but we are in the process of developing a standard on measuring the sustainability of tourism. This is something that Manuel also mentioned in his introduction. So one of the main priorities currently of the UNWTO Statistics Department is the development of a statistical framework similar to the other 2 standards that I mentioned before for measuring the sustainability of tourism in all its dimensions, not only in economic, but only in environmental and social dimensions. This framework makes use of existing standards such as TSA and the System of Environmental and Economic Accounts. And it aims to become the third standard on tourism statistics, in addition to the other 2 that I mentioned before. And it will when it is presented to the UN Statistical Commission. I won't go in more detail on this because, like I said, we will have a separate item session on that. This is with standards. The second pillar that I mentioned is the capacity building. In terms of capacity building, we have 3 types of activities. First one is the creation of materials to aid in the implementation of standards, to help countries in the implementation. In terms of the core topic 1, basic tourism statistics, one of the main material we have is the compilation guide with international recommendations for tourism statistics, which establishes some more practical recommendations for the implementation of these recommendations. And we recently also, in the context of COVID, of course, COVID creates a lot of challenges in terms of measuring tourism, a lot of conceptual challenges because there's changes in the scope of what tourism is. There's different types of travel. There's hotels who have turned into hospital wards in some cases. So is this tourism or is it not? We also released recently a conceptual guidance on tourism statistics in the COVID-19 context. I'm putting the link there. You will receive these presentations eventually, and so you will have the link to also access this material online. The second core, in terms of the second core topic, the economic contribution, we're currently working on a compilation guide for the TSA, similarly to the one we already released, that's already been released for the international recommendations on tourism statistics. And then there's some material here on measuring the sustainability of tourism. Again, I won't go into this too much because we will have a separate session on it. A second type of activity we have for capacity building is technical assistance. So from the UNWTO, we support countries in specific issues on tourism statistics that they may have. Between 2017 and 2020, there were 35 countries with projects implemented or implementation in tourism statistics. Here you can see the geographical distribution of these countries. You can see that the Americas account for about between 20 and 25% of these countries. What are the types of support that is provided to these countries? Well, in this, again, in the 3 different core topics that I've structured the presentation on basic tourism statistics, this is mostly some of the topics are, for example, employment, tourism employment statistics, visitor and expenditure surveys, strengthening in general the system of tourism statistics at the national level, some needs assessment in terms of how to plan for something, for a specific goal. In terms of TSA implementation, we support countries also in the implementation of TSA and the compilation of tables, and also on developing a plan for the implementation of the TSA. Of course, often the implementation of TSA can be a very long project. Then, as a third type of activity we have in capacity building is what we call global and regional capacity building. The main type of activity that this corresponds to is regional statistics capacity building programs. And this covers both core topic 1 on basic tourism statistics and core topic 2 on economic contribution. We have done a few in the past. Here are some examples. In Europe in 2008, 2009, in English-speaking Africa between 2008 and 2010, Asia and the Pacific from 2010 to 2012, CIS in Georgia 2011 to 2013, and currently we are doing one in Francophone Africa, which was supposed to end last year, but because of COVID, we had to postpone it, but it started in 2017. As you can see, these are more long-term programs, which try to work together with countries in specific workshops, work with a subset of countries and work specifically with them. I'll explain a little bit more now of what composes these regional capacity building programs. Normally, it's between 18 months and 2 years long. It requires some, of course, some resources for the organization of all these events, because it takes 3 to 4 different workshops that are also spaced out by about 6 months each, and then at the end it ends with a regional seminar. These workshops normally focuses on a subset of the region that it represents, a subset of countries. A first workshop normally is the most intense. It's 4 days long. It focuses mostly on basic tourism statistics, both on the theory and the practice. Some exercises and homework is done in advance to this workshop by the participating countries. And one of the main goals of this first workshop is to actually evaluate the current state of the regional tourism statistics and set objectives for each country until the end of the program. After 6 months, countries have time to think about this, to make some implementations, to try to get some progress on these plans. And there's a second workshop that is a bit shorter, about 3 days, where countries present the advancement of the program that they've set. And there's also technical sessions, mostly focused on additional items from basic tourism statistics and on TSA as well. Again, some time is left, and there's some support that is provided by experts to countries in the meantime. And there's a third workshop, which is a bit shorter as well. It takes about 2 days, and mostly focuses on the identification of needs and next steps and plans ahead for the implementation to be able to set the objectives that were set in the first workshop. And finally, sometime later, there's a regional seminar where now all the countries from the region are brought together, and the participating countries present their achievements, their lessons learned, and their plans for the rest of for the next few months or years. So how can the participating countries be selected? Where member states, we normally try to focus on member states who have voiced their need for training in tourism statistics and TSA, and that have identified this as a priority. This allows to use the resources that are used for this regional capacity building program in a more efficient manner, because we work with economies of scale with different countries that are benefiting from the same activities, and also create synergies between the different countries as well. There are normally 3 participants from each country, representing the National Tourism Administration, the National Statistical Office, and the Central Bank. So these types of program, also what they do is they foster interagency cooperation at the national level. And also, well, there's experts and staff that are involved both in the workshops that I mentioned before, but also in between in providing support to countries. So this is, in a nutshell, what the regional capacity building program is. These are the 3 types of activities that I said that we do for capacity building. The 3rd pillar that I mentioned before is on data collection and publication. So UNWTO has probably the most comprehensive database on tourism statistics in the world. It has over 145 indicators for more than 220 countries. We collect data from March to December and publish normally in the 1st quarter of each year. You can find the data in the UNWTO website and in the flagship publications, which are the compendium and the yearbook, which will be released shortly. So on basic tourism statistics, like I forgot to mention, this database is mostly on basic tourism statistics. We also have a few other products, which are, for example, country fact sheets that are created based on these indicators. So on our website, you can also see different visualizations of the data. And also we have a tourism dashboard where you can also explore extra data as well and visualize the data that we already have on the database. Again, you can go to the links. You can find the links on this presentation later on when you access the presentations. In terms of the economic contribution, we also collect data. We started collecting data in 2019 on tourism direct GDP and on the implementation of TSA. This is mostly because 2 of the SDG indicators of the Sustainable Development Goals indicators that are related to tourism are under the custodiancy of UNWTO. These are the 891 on tourism direct GDP and 12B1 on the implementation of TSA. Here you can see a map on tourism direct GDP as a proportion of total GDP, national GDP of the world, of the data that we have. As you can see, we have a bit over 75 different countries in the world. If you look specifically within the Caribbean, we have data for Bermuda, Jamaica, and Puerto Rico. And then we also have collect information, like I said, on the implementation status of TSA, measured by the number of tables of tourism satellite accounts that are compiled in every country. Here you can see the map. The darker the color, the more tables that are compiled. The lighter the color, the fewer tables that are compiled. Again, if you look at the Caribbean, you can see we have some data. I would encourage you to go to our website and explore this. Thank you very much for your presentation, for your attention. I think this ends the presentations for item 2. As I mentioned before, you can post your questions on the Q&A box or raise your hand, and we'll be able to give you the floor. If anyone has any questions, I'll be happy to respond. Otherwise, we can continue to item 3. I don't see any questions or hands risen. So I'll go on to item 3, which is on tourism statistics and tourism satellite account. We already touched upon this. The key ingredients for designing and monitoring tourism policies. So now we're going to start also seeing some participation, which I think is one of the main value added of this type of events too, is how countries can be involved, and countries can also share their experiences with us and with the rest of the countries as well, with the rest of the international tourism community. We'll start session 3. It's supposed to last about 1 hour and 15 minutes. We have also quite a few presentations here. I'll first make a brief presentation on the value and advantages of official tourism statistics and TSA. Then Leandri Moreno, also from UNWTO, will make a presentation on institutional cooperation for the measurement of tourism. And we'll move on to examples from countries and from an expert we're very happy to have with us today, Kevin Millington, on how to make use of tourism statistics for tourism policies. So I'll start first with my presentation on the value and advantages of official tourism statistics and TSA. Let me see. Apologies. Let's see now if I can share. One second, please. I'm having some trouble finding my presentation. It's open, but I cannot seem to find it on the share screen. Let me see if I can. Okay. I think now you can see it. So for this presentation, I will a brief outline. I will first talk about the value of official statistics in general. Then I'll focus on official tourism statistics and the standards that I've already mentioned. I'll go a little bit in more detail on this. And then I will touch upon basic tourism statistics and TSA and what they are and what are the advantages of using them. So in terms of the value of official statistics, one has to wonder what the value is in a time when there's so much data around. Most of the processes, especially in tourism, have been digitalized for a while now, which creates a big flow of data from Google searches, from reviews, from even mobile networks that can tell us how people move, hotel or accommodation booking platforms, flight booking platforms, even social media. So this creates a lot of data that is available to us and that maybe was not available before. Many people in some circles call this the data revolution because this data increases also a lot in an exponential manner. And also the technologies available to be able to process these data are also increasing and improving every day. This creates the opportunity for some private sector companies, for example, that can compete in terms of statistics and can provide very interesting products from the data and analysis side, especially in the field of tourism. And also, which is something that can be seen lately with the COVID situation, there's an increased value in data in general. So in this context, what is the value of official statistics currently? Well, I think it's important first to look at the characteristics of these types of statistics in comparison to its competitors, let's say. First of all, official statistics are always impartial. They're independent, so there's no interests involved. They are professional, so there's a certain quality that we know we get when we look at official statistics. They're scientific in the terms that they follow specific standards like the ones I've mentioned before. These standards that have been agreed upon by the international scientific and statistical community. They are vocal, and this is also, I think, a very important characteristic because they can provide insights into in the use of specific statistics and interpretation of the statistics as well. They're flexible. Traditionally, official statistics have been focused mostly on surveys and these types of censuses and these types of data sources, but other sources such as administrative sources or even big data have been also becoming more and more important, and they have been included in official statistics sources in a very comprehensive manner as well. Confidentiality, also, this is a very important issue, I think, in a time when there's lots of discussions about data privacy. Official statistics normally ensure the confidentiality of the respondent and of the information. It's transparent in its methods, in the sense that the methods are very well documented and public, and everyone can find them. And finally, it's collaborative, because often they require an effort from different agencies within the national ecosystem, but also from different countries, from the national statistical community. So in a world where it is sometimes very hard to filter through a very high volume of data, such as the one we described previously, what do official statistics bring? So based on these characteristics, they bring strong reputation and independence, and something that is very important, which is the trust on the numbers that are published. Confidence of users, in the sense that there is a transparency in the methods that official statistics producers can also provide insights into how to use the data, into how to interpret it. And also confidence of the respondents, because of the confidentiality that official statistics ensure. There's methodological consistency, which is also extremely important, especially when we're building long time series. And also that the only goal is truthful information, which is also this issue of impartiality. So, official statistics are used in decision-making in many aspects, of course. That's one of the main reasons why they are produced. Some examples are calculation of minimum wages, policies to reduce unemployment, government representation, the determination of subsidies, etc. But sometimes it happens that there are misuse of official statistics. Here are some examples from the past. For example, in Hungary, the consumer price index was misunderstood and rent was adjusted in the wrong way. Sometimes even the analysis is done in the wrong way. For example, in Canada, there were a few articles on the vanishing advantage of a university degree. It was found later that this was because of wrong interpretation of the data. So often, something that official statistics producers can also bring is to educate some users in terms of how to use these data as well, and how to interpret and analyze this data, because they have a lot of insight into how these data were produced. So in this context, official statistics producers can provide knowledge necessary to properly use and interpret official statistics, provide guidance as to what statistics are most useful, what data should be used for each of the different policy needs, and also help make sense of the available data and sources, such as, for example, big data sources. Official statistics can help process and make sense of these types of data. Now on to specifically official tourism statistics. So we move now from the advantages of official statistics to the field specifically of tourism. Like I said, standards are very, very important in this context. They provide a common language. They specify they define specifically different concepts that are very useful, that are necessary to measure tourism, and they do it in a comparable manner, in a standardized and comparable manner that allow to compare internationally and also intranationally within the country, between different regions, or between different sectors, etc. This helps build trust, which is something very, very important when we're talking about statistics. So there are two main standards, as I mentioned before, in tourism statistics. These provide mostly three main advantages, which is providing the standardization of concepts. For example, what is a visitor in terms of the international recommendations for tourism statistics? What is a visitor? What is tourism? These were concepts that before were not well defined, but thanks to these standards, now they are very well defined. Classifications, which industries are included within tourism industries, what products, what types of tourism there are, how are they defined, and main basic indicators as well. For example, number of visitors, arrivals, expenditure, employees, jobs, which are two different concepts, etc. The tourism satellite account, which is the second standard, builds on these definitions and concepts and classifications from the IRTS, which are the international recommendations for tourism statistics. In terms of standardization of concepts, it brings 10 main tables with well-defined concepts. It uses the classifications to disaggregate these tables and to be able to also disaggregate the tourism sector. It also provides main basic indicators, main indicators, which come from the TSA, which, as you know, are full-time equivalent jobs, tourism direct GDP, tourism direct GVA, and also is comparable with other standards. This is also very important because it's compatible with, for example, with a system of national accounts, which allows to compare with other industries and sectors, which is one of the main advantages of the TSA. Let's take a look now. Let's go specifically into basic tourism statistics. We'll touch upon TSA again later on, but now let's move on to basic tourism statistics. What types of data, what types of indicators are available? So there are basically 5 different themes that are covered in basic tourism statistics. What I'm presenting here is based on the data that we collect. So it's kind of biased towards what UNWTO does in terms of data collection. But of course, there's other indicators as well that are very, very useful within basic tourism statistics. In terms of inbound tourism, the first of the themes, one of the main indicators is arrivals, of course, which can be disaggregated by region, by country as well, country of origin, by main purpose, by mode of transport, accommodation statistics as well, guests, overnights, expenditure, tourism expenditure as well, and also other indicators such as average size of the travel party, average length of stay, and average expenditure per day. A second subject, the second theme, is domestic tourism. We will go tomorrow we'll go a bit deeper into how these are defined and the different types of tourism there are. For now, we'll just focus on the indicators. So what kind of indicators are there in terms of domestic tourism? What we collect from UNWTO, it includes number of trips, disaggregated by main purpose, by mode of transport, by form of organization as well. There's accommodation data that can help with domestic tourism as well. It's not here, we don't collect it, but also expenditure, which is something very important as well for domestic tourism. And also similar indicators to inbound in terms of the average size of the travel party, average length of stay, and average expenditure. In terms of outbound tourism, this is a bit more difficult to measure in general, but some of the main indicators are departures, expenditure, and other indicators such as average length of stay and average expenditure. Another area that is very interesting and can provide lots of insights is tourism industries. We call this to refer to the demographics of the tourism sector. Some of the indicators are, for example, the number of establishments, disaggregated, for example, by the different tourism industries. Or monetary data, for example, from the accommodation in hotels and similar establishment sector industry, which includes different aggregates from the system of national accounts. Non-monetary data as well, which are more related to the capacity, number of establishments, number of rooms, number of bed places, and indicators of, say, performance, occupancy rate, average length of stay, for example. We collect all this data on an annual basis, normally in UNWTO, but of course, at the national level, they can also be compiled on a monthly or a quarterly level. The last main subject would be employment. And some of the main indicators are the number of employees by tourism industries. Again, this can be disaggregated by the different tourism industries: accommodation, food and beverage, passenger transportation, etc. Number of jobs by status and employment, which is different from number of employees. Again, this is a different concept, and they're both defined within the IRTS, the International Recommendation on Tourism Statistics. And a third concept, which is the number of full-time equivalent jobs, which normally come from the TSA. And these also can be disaggregated by status, employees and self-employed, and gender, for example. But of course, they can also be disaggregated by many other characteristics, such as age and anything that could be useful to the country. Finally, we also collect or compute, based on this data, compute some complementary indicators, such as, for example, inbound tourism expenditure over GDP, tourism balance, inbound tourism expenditure over exports of goods, etc. So now I thought it was interesting for, especially I understand that this first stage is more directed not so much for technical compilers of statistics, but mostly for people more on the policy side. And I think it's important for people on the policy side to also understand where these data, these indicators come from. So here you can find a very summarizing and very simple summary of the different sources that are used for each of the indicators. For example, where do the international tourism flows come from? The data on the arrivals by country, for example, where mostly one of the main sources is coming from administrative data, immigration records, for example. But also there are some secondary or complementary sources that can also help, such as the accommodation establishment surveys or surveys at borders, or sometimes big data sources such as mobile network operators, booking platforms, etc. In terms of characteristics of international visitors, normally the main sources for this are also admin data, passport control, where or the forms that are required when somebody enters the country. These are often incomplete, so they can be complemented also with surveys at borders or other types of surveys as well. In terms of domestic tourism, the main source in general for this type of tourism, which is not very easy to measure, are tourism household surveys. For specific variables and indicators, establishment surveys can help, or also lately big data sources such as mobile network operators data can also be very useful. In terms of expenditure, both inbound and outbound, the main source are normally surveys, mostly surveys at borders. Also, household surveys can also help with outbound outbound expenditure. In terms of tourism industries, establishment surveys are one of the main sources as well. And in terms of employment, of course, the labor force survey and establishment surveys can be also very useful. Again, this is just, I think it's important. I wanted to give a short a brief explanation of this because I think it's important for policymakers to see where the data also comes from and know that if something is affected, then that may also affect the production of these statistics as well. Okay, now moving on to tourism, to TSA, to Tourism Satellite Account. What is it and why do we need it? Well, tourism is defined within the IRTS, International Recommendations for Tourism Statistics, as a demand-side phenomenon. This means that tourism is pretty much all activities on the expenditure and all activities that are related to what visitors and tourists do in a country. This includes a lot of tourism industries, of course, which is the way it's seen, for example, from the system of national accounts, which defines a number of tourism industries, of industries, sorry, and disaggregates data based on that. Some of the tourism industries as defined by the IRTS are the ones that you can find here: accommodation, of course, food and beverage, restaurants, passenger transport, travel agencies, retail, for example, the sale of souvenirs, etc. Now, as tourism is a phenomenon that is defined from the demand side, from what visitors and tourists do, not all of these, not the totality of these industries are actually attributable to tourism. For example, if you look at restaurants, restaurants can be, restaurants will serve both tourists and will also serve residents. So we need to separate these two. Since the system of national accounts does not separate within these industries, that's where the need for a satellite account comes in for tourism. We need to be able to disaggregate these industries into tourism and non-tourism. So what does TSA do? Well, mainly one of the main advantages of TSA is the link it can provide between supply and visitor demand in a way that I just showed with the tourism industries. It also makes it comparable to other sectors and industries, like I said, so we can compare the contribution of tourism to the contribution of agriculture, for example. And it's also comparable to other countries and over time. Since the methodology is always the same, we can also compare it over time if this is an exercise that is done over a number of periods of time. It has 10 main standard tables that cover inbound, domestic tourism and outbound tourism expenditure, internal tourism expenditure, which is inbound plus domestic expenditure, because it's what the tourism expenditure that happens, that takes place in the country. Production accounts of tourism industries, what we call GVA, the gross value added of tourism, and the gross domestic product of tourism. This is, of course, one of the main indicators of the TSA. Employment tables, investment, government consumption, and other non-monetary indicators that I've touched upon before, such as arrivals, etc. What are the uses and advantages of TSA? Well, it has several uses and several advantages, both to the private sector and public officials. In terms of the private sector, it's a very good tool for advocacy, since it provides an objective measurement of the contribution of tourism. It helps identify the composition of the sector because it's disaggregated by the different industries. It can also help define how dependent specific industries are on tourism. For example, in the case of restaurants that we saw before, we can know how much restaurants are serving tourists and how much are serving residents, which is a very useful potentially for marketing issues or to see how, for example, the COVID-19 crisis will affect the restaurant industry, assuming that it can stay open, of course. It can also help determine the components of tourism demand, which can help redirect marketing strategies. And it can also provide an impartial evolution of the market because of this time series that I've mentioned before. For public officials, it also has lots of uses and advantages. Some are a better understanding of the sector. Again, by disaggregating on the different ranges, the different industries that are involved and how these are interconnected. It can also help strengthen the system of tourism statistics. Of course, to be able to compile a TSA, one first needs to work on basic tourism statistics and sources. So this will also get a lot stronger with the compilation of TSA. It can help improve marketing policies and strategies by providing better data and also better analysis and effectiveness of these policies. It can help mainstream tourism into the general macroeconomic policies because it can provide an idea of the contribution of tourism to the whole economy, and also can show how it relates to other sectors. So this can help, for example, include tourism components of policies into policies that are mainly on other issues, such as, for example, agriculture or transport, etc. It can help identify areas for private-public cooperation. It can also facilitate interagency cooperation because TSAs are normally a multi-stakeholder effort that includes at least the National Tourism Administration, central banks, and national statistical offices, but very likely more players as well. And it can also help empower national tourism administrations within governments because of leading this multi-stakeholder effort and because of providing this tool for advocacy by having an independent measure of the contribution. This is it from my side in terms of this first presentation. It went a bit longer than I expected, but I wanted to be as thorough as possible with it. So again, without further ado, I'll pass on. We'll try to complete all the presentations first, and then we'll look at the other questions and answer questions that are available that the participants have posed. We will also have a poll at the end of this session. But for now, I'll pass the virtual floor to my colleague Leandri. Leandri, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Hernan. Good morning, everybody. It is my pleasure to be with you all today. So I'm going to share my screen here. Okay. Okay, so I guess that it's now in your screen. So today I would like to talk to you about the institutional cooperation for the measurement of tourism. I mean here the cooperation at a national level. So at UNWTO, we believe that interinstitutional cooperation is critical for tourism statistics. Indeed, the production of official statistics typically requires the participation of several agencies and consequently the establishment of institutional arrangements. Such arrangements ensure that official statistics meet the needs of users, follow quality standards, and are compiled and disseminated in the most efficient way. All institutions that are related to tourism statistics, either as provider of information or as user, should be involved in order to coordinate and commit their active participation in the development of the system of tourism statistics. So, as you all know, the work of statistics is much more than the production of numbers. Statistics is also very much a political issue. In fact, the development of statistics is a strategic project. Statistics must serve policy and politics, and the reverse is also true. In fact, statistical development in countries is bound to fail if institutional leaders are not engaged. So in that sense, UNWTO considers that this could be a great opportunity for our constituencies, the national tourism administrations, to lead the establishment of a network of cooperation between the different institutions, or what we usually call at UNWTO the interinstitutional platform. So what organizations could be involved in the so-called interinstitutional platforms? We have, of course, the bodies that produce statistics and basic tourism information. The main relevance are, of course, the national statistical offices as producers of basic statistics and compilers of national accounts, the national tourism administrations as the entities responsible for public policy on tourism and for the coordination of public and private stakeholders, central banks, which often compile the balance of payments, immigration and border protection authorities, as they are responsible for border procedures, and also associations of national tourism enterprises, as they often provide information and are key users of tourism statistics also. So we have also the main user of the information. Of course, the body that produces tourism statistics can also be users, but others are also relevant, such as tourism industry representatives and other private sector entities, or universities and Center for Research on Tourism, but also can be relevant the customs administrations, Ministry of Trade and Economy, Ministry of Finance and tax authorities. So the way such an interinstitutional platform should be set up will depend heavily on the organization of the statistical system of the country and the way institutions are used to coordinate together and to set up structures in common projects. It can be set up through specific agreements, either formal or informal, between the National Tourism Administration and the other institutions. Of course, formal agreements are more difficult to achieve at the beginning, but they help in defining more precisely the responsibility of each institution and the level of participation in the different stages of the process. Formal agreements will also help to ensure continuity of the commitment of the different institutions involved. So, in terms of structures, it will depend on the various layers can be considered, and it will depend on the level of decision. So we have a first layer, a high level one, with a more political scope and responsibility. It would include the heads of the corresponding bodies and chaired by the Ministry of Tourism or its equivalent. It would determine the basic policy issues and provide the required institutional support in terms of staff, technical capabilities, and financial resources, and should, of course, endorse and disseminate the results at the end. A second level, representing a major technical team with experts from the different participating institutions to coordinate all the technical work, and this would correspond to, for example, a national team for tourism statistics or a national TSA team. And then we have a third level made of ad hoc technical committees convened according to the different topics to be faced, for example, the measurement of inbound tourism or expenditure. And it would comprise technical staff specialized in different relevant topics and coming from the different institutions involved in the platform. So, of course, in the framework of our capacity building programs or technical assistant activity mentioned earlier by Hernan, UNWTO also provides support to the countries in their establishment of the interinstitutional platform and gives further details, information, and also provides recommendations on a case-by-case basis. We even consider this aspect at an early stage of the capacity building program. So even before the first workshop of the program, we usually ask countries to complete a questionnaire on their system of tourism statistics, and we ask them to complete in a coordinated manner, so as to have one by country and not one by each institution. This gives us a sense of what could look like the cooperation at the national level, and if we need to put more emphasis on this subject or not in the capacity building program. So indeed, as an anecdote, for this workshop in particular, we have used the same approach. We have asked our colleagues to coordinate the responses of the questionnaire. And after seeing the results, we have decided to include an item on this subject in this agenda. So why we believe this is an important aspect for the development of tourism statistics? What are the benefits of this interinstitutional platform? Well, stakeholders learn to understand their fundamental role within the statistical process and become more willing to make the efforts needed to provide the information produced on time and in the exact format required. The development of tourism statistics and TSA takes on the status of a state or national initiative. It's no more a single project by a single agency. Access to the necessary funding from within or outside the country is facilitated. The results, of course, are provided with legitimacy and credibility. Tourism statistics are compiled and disseminated with maximum efficiency. And finally, there is a greater guarantee that the effort to improve tourism statistics will be sustainable on time. So to finish, I would like to share with you a couple of country examples, merely illustrative, from outside the Caribbean region. First Canada and then Malaysia. So these presentations were included in a workshop on tourism satellite account in Europe and were presented by their own representative. You can find the information in the UNWTO webpage. But basically, in Canada, so they have the Tourism Research Partners Forum. This interinstitutional platform objective is to provide a standing venue for decision-making on all aspects of existing jointly funding tourism research projects and a venue for the formation of partnerships on future jointly funded national or multi-jurisdictional tourism research projects. This platform is composed by the National Tourism Organization, the Canadian Tourism Commission, Statistics Canada, provinces and territories, the Atlantic Canada Opportunity Agency, Parks Canada, Tourism Human Resources Canada, and municipalities. For the case of Malaysia, we see here all the entities involved and their role. So we have, they have the Ministry of Finance, which is in charge of the preparation of annual budget. Tourism Malaysia, they are in charge of the Departing Visitor Survey and Malaysia Outbound Survey. The Economic Planning Unit, they are in charge of the preparation of the development plans, both the medium and long-term plans for the countries. Of course, Immigration Department, which is in charge of the tourist and excursionist arrival data. Then also the Central Bank, in charge of secondary data and relevant financial indicators. Of course, the Ministry of Tourism and Culture, which is in charge of the national planning and budget. And the last but not the least, the Department of Statistics, in charge of national accounts, balance of payments, domestic tourism surveys, and the TSA compilation. Oops. So all of these examples are available at the UNWTO webpage with detailed information and even more country examples. So I will be happy to respond to your questions in the Q&A moment later, and to also hear from your perspective what is your experience in terms of cooperation in your country? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thanks a lot, Landry. Very, very interesting. I would like now to move on to the point 3.3 on the program, which I think is also it's more the practical examples, which I think will be very, very, very interesting, coming from countries and from an expert we have with us today as well. So without further ado, I'll pass the virtual floor to Kevin Millington. Kevin, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Hernan. And thank you very much for inviting me to speak today. Firstly, hopefully everyone can see that, my first slide. Yeah, great pleasure. And I know I've already seen a few names of colleagues out there in the Caribbean who've worked with in the past. And so hello, big hello from me. As you can see, I've got my palm tree here just to make me feel slightly closer to you all. So what I've only got a really short spot here, about 10 minutes, I think, because our colleagues from Bahamas and Jamaica are speaking afterwards. But what I want to do is show the importance of statistics, and in particular, the importance of using visitor surveys as part of a project which I'm working on at the moment with the World Bank and the OECS in St. Lucia, Dominica, Grenada, and St. Vincent and the Grenadines, looking at the development of blue tourism. And it just seemed very relevant when I first spoke to Hernan, but to try and give this as a very practical example of just how important tourism statistics are. So very quickly, background to the project. It's looking at developing blue tourism, so a sustainable form of coastal and marine tourism in the OECS region. But as I say, we're focusing specifically on the 4 countries I just mentioned, Dominica, Grenada, St. Lucia and St. Vincent. And well, what is marine and coastal tourism? Well, of course, in the Caribbean, it's pretty much the vast proportion of your tourism product, talking about cruises, recreational boat tours, recreational fishing, scuba diving, marine life observation, all sorts of water sports, and recreational use of beaches. And what this project is looking at is a movement towards blue tourism. So again, what do we mean by blue tourism? Well, it's really a sustainable form of coastal and marine tourism. And I've tried to sort of put it here in diagram format. If you just looking at the left there, I'm not sure if my cursor works when you all see it, but on the left, we've got the blue economy, which is, you know, the sustainable use of the oceans for economic growth. And then to the right of that, we've got marine and coastal tourism. Now, this might not be blue tourism. It might not be using the ocean resources and the shoreline resources in a sustainable way. And so really what this project's aiming to do is to bring those 2 circles so they overlap. So our marine and our coastal tourism is as sustainable as possible. So it becomes blue tourism. So that's where we're trying to get to over the duration.
Sorry, Kevin.
Project.
Sorry, I think we cannot see your slides. I think we're stuck in the first one. Yeah.
Right. Okay. Let's just see what's happening here. Let me just try get it.
Ah, perfect.
Well, but is that? Do you see everything on my screen, not just the slides?
Now it went back. We see the first slide, and then on the side we see the little slides. Okay, there you go. You can go like that.
Okay. Ideally, I wouldn't want you to see the little slides, but better than you not seeing any slides at all.
Yeah.
It seems that when I go on to, let me just try one other thing before I continue. Presenter view. Let me just try one more thing. If not, we'll have to look at it in this format.
Play from the start, Kevin. Play from the start. On that drop down?
It's just rendering on my screen. Now, do you see a second slide now or not? No.
Do you see the slideshow tab at the top next to home, insert, draw, design, transitions, animations, and then slideshow? At the top of the PowerPoint.
PowerPoint, yes, slideshow. So
right. Click play from start.
Okay, right. And right, so that shows the first slide.
That should not be doing that. Let's see if there's another way you can do it. There should be a little monitor at near the taskbar in PowerPoint. That's the display. Okay, tell you what, can I take control of your computer?
Yeah, it was a good idea.
All right, let me take control. You have to give me control, Kevin. I think you
have control. You have control.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. One second. All right, I have another idea. I'm going to run your PowerPoint from my computer.
Very good.
That can't seem to get control of yours.
Okay.
Okay, just give me a minute. Let me share my screen. Is everyone seeing OECS Blue Economy, Tourism Analytics? Yes? All right, Kevin, just cue me when you need me to move to the next slide.
Okay, I won't start again, but that was just the slide just summarizing the project. So if you just move to the next one, and the next slide was where I covered the range of products, the range of activities which form marine and coastal tourism, which you'll obviously all be very familiar with. Now, if we move to the next slide, which is just where I've got to. So this is where I was talking about marine and coastal tourism and how we're trying to bring it so that it overlaps with the blue economy, so that our marine and coastal tourism becomes fully sustainable. And this is this diagram where what we're trying to get is those two circles overlapping, and then we've got a marine coastal tourism which is sustainable. It's not adverse to the environment. It is something which is both economically viable, but also focuses on promotion of local communities and conservation of resources. So that's what the project's all about getting to. Now, if we go to the next slide, this is now I'm just focusing in this very short presentation on one element of it, and that's what we had to do was look at what amount of expenditure in each of the four countries was attributed to coastal and marine tourism. So to get there, we had to go through four steps. First of all, segment the market. So, and then look at how many tourist arrivals travel to each country in each segment, how much they spent, and then we were able to work out how much was attributed to coastal and marine resources, the coastal and marine ecosystem. So let's start with segmentation. If we start there, now the next slide. Now, of course, we all know what segment's about. It's all about looking at our markets and looking at what they do, where they stay, how much they spend, how old are they, who do they travel with, what kind of travel group, how do they book their holidays, how long do they stay. These are the sort of things which are so important for understanding our markets. Now, most of those attributes can only be determined from a visitor survey. Without a visitor survey, most of those are very difficult to measure. As Hernan was showing in that first previous presentation, that grid, and so many of the things that we needed to look had to gather were from an inbound survey. It's such an important tool. So those are the things that we need to do. Now, arguably, one of the most important as far as segmenting a market is what people do. And if we go to the next slide, what we identified was 12 different activities that leisure tourists were participating in the countries that we're studying, such as beach activities, diving, water sports, cruising, yachting, and so on. And we identified what these particular activities were, and by doing that, we were able to then segment the leisure tourism to each country into 10 different segments based on what they were doing and a few of the other attributes, such as what accommodation they were staying in, how much they were spending, and so on. And if we go to the next slide, these are the 10 segments that we identified. Now, some of them are fairly obvious. Some of them, like cruisers, we all know what a cruiser is. They arrive in a cruise ship, they normally spend a day, and then they depart. Yacht visitors, yachters, very similar. We know that they arrive or they move around on a yacht. But a lot of the other segments are, there's a little bit more to them. I mean, let's just take the one at the top, fly and flop. These are the sort of mid-spend beach tourists. So they're flying in. They tend to be relatively unadventurous. They're mid-range accommodation. They're very much focused on the beach and the swimming pool, whilst you've got the luxury relaxers, which are staying in a more five-star accommodation. They're utilizing spa treatments and so on. So all these different segments, these 10 different segments, they're all doing slightly different things. They're spending slightly differently. They're traveling slightly differently. And again, to be able to segment these markets, to the leisure market, in this way requires good data, requires visitor survey amongst anything else. Okay, so the next slide, please. So what we did here, don't worry too much about this, all these whizzy lines going everywhere, but what we're doing here is linking the activities, they're the activities at the top, the 12 activities, with the segments. So you can see which activities the segments principally engaged with. So for example, if we just going to look at one in detail, fly and flop, we can see fly and flop's got those yellow lines on the left-hand side. So we see that fly and flop leisure tourists principally engaged with water sports, beach and beach accommodation, and marine wildlife. So, and we know that because we know it from our visitor survey. So we're able to say, right, this is what they principally do. Doesn't mean that they don't necessarily go scuba diving, or they might not go to a spa, but principally, these are the activities that they engage with. So that was able to link up our activities and our segments. And you'll see why that's important in a minute as far as measuring what the importance of coastal and marine is to the visitor economy. So if we go to the next slide, please. Now, we know where we get our visitor data from. We get our visitor data from the entry card, as Hernan was just saying, that a very important part of our tourism statistics. But you'll all be very familiar with this card in the Caribbean. Towards the bottom, we've got our purpose of visit. Now, most of our segments all fall into vacation. So this entry card is not particularly useful for segmentation. Yes, for certain segments that we can identify very easily, like cruisers. We know how many people come by cruise. We know how many people come by yacht because of where they come into and how they present themselves to immigration. But a lot of the other ones, fly and flop, luxury relaxers, active water sports, we can't get this data from the entry card, but we do know the total population from the entry card, and that utilizing that and utilizing the visitor survey, we're able to attribute the number of visitors from our arrival statistics into each segment. If we go to the next slide, Equally, from our visitor survey, and of course, one of the main reasons we often do a visitor survey is for economic impact, for tourism satellite account. Again, as Hernan said, without an inbound visitor survey, table 1 of your TSA is pretty much a non-starter. So we're often very much focused on visitor expenditure on visitor surveys, but obviously they have many other uses, and here we're going to use the expenditure by the inbound visitors and their length of stay, and attribute this again to the different segments. And if we just go to the next slide, this was from one of the countries, I think it was from St. Lucia, but it doesn't really matter. Here we are, we've attributed the number of arrivals, number of leisure arrivals into the different segments, and it allows us to see how many arrivals are. We know the average length of stay, because we have that again from visitor survey. We know their average spend per night, and of course we can then calculate their total expenditure. So what we've done, we've taken our inbound leisure market, and we've estimated total tourist expenditure by the different segments. Now if we go to the next slide, what we're doing now is, can you press the, press again please, because I think something appears. Oh yeah, and keep pressing until you'll see lots of little, yes, right. Now what these are, stop when they all appear. What these are what we call our coastal and marine ecosystem dependency. And what we've done, we've attached a ratio to each segment. So let's just focus on the obvious ones. Yachters and active water sports, they've got a ratio of 1, which means the coastal marine ecosystem they're fully dependent on it. Without it, active water sports would not happen without the sea. Whilst if we take something like luxury relaxers, which is second in from the left, it's at 0.75. And that's because there's certain other elements of the tourism project that are used, which we aren't directly related to coastal and marine ecosystems, such as spas, for example. So could you just press it 3 more times, just so the inland explorers, regional relaxers? Yeah, lovely. So what you see there, we've got a range of ratios that we're going to apply to each segment, dependent on how each segment interacts with activities, which are what we would call coastal and marine activities. And if we go to the next slide, we'll see how we've applied that. We've simply, in that middle column, applied the ratio to the expenditure to give what's in our last column, is what we're calling the visitor expenditure, which is attributed to coastal and marine. So the bold total at the bottom, we're saying, well, we've got about 1 billion of expenditure, because these are in millions. We've got 1 billion of expenditure out of almost 1.4 billion, which is attributed to coastal and marine ecosystems. Without our coastal and marine ecosystems, effectively that's lost. And if you just press, sorry, 1 more time, just so the box moves to the bottom, what we've gone 1 step further. We've used knowledge from other tourism satellite accounts that we've done elsewhere. We said we've estimated that the intermediate consumption is about 40% of this, and therefore the gross value added to the economy from coastal and marine is 630 million. So you see the process of being through. It's very quick, very simple. It's only one small part of this bigger project, but it was a very important part, because we had to start at the very beginning and say, right, how important is coastal and marine tourism? How important is the coastal and marine ecosystem to tourism in each country? And this is the process that we went through to get there. So just the final slide, because I know there's other presenters waiting. Final slide, what do we take away from this? First of all, visitor surveys are absolutely critical for market segmentation. Without a visitor survey, to do any segmentation work is nigh on impossible. Visitor surveys are also important for measuring the economic impact of tourism, developing tourism satellite account, and certainly to measure the sustainability of tourism. And I know Clara is talking about this later, which would be really interesting. But visitor surveys are important for a whole scope of things beyond just the TSA, such as marketing, planning, policy making. You know, it is such an important part of your statistical armory. So please take them seriously. Thank you very much indeed.
Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot, Kevin. This is an excellent, very practical example of what can be done with this type of data and what can be achieved. Now I'd like to pass the floor. We have the honor of having Ms. Joy Gibrilu, the Director General of the Ministry of Tourism in the Bahamas. Ms. Gibrilu, the floor is all yours. Thank you very much.
Good morning, and thank you all very much indeed. I will now try and get it up to, okay, slideshow, okay. I'm hoping that everyone can see my screen. But I want to thank the CTO and UNWTO for the opportunity to just share a very brief overview on the importance of tourism statistics, and obviously giving it within the context of the Bahamas. Hernan, it was good listening to your second presentation. You mentioned a lot of things that will be echoed in my presentation. And I think it was very reassuring to know that maybe we are doing some things correctly when I heard what you said, but I think it's because we work closely, both with CTO and the UNWTO, on ensuring that our statistics are as robust as possible. And similarly, Kevin, he mentioned a number of things that will be echoed in my few moments in this presentation. So in the face of heightened global competition in the tourism industry, tourism statistics have become very important to providing the evidence base for the strategic approach to destination marketing and the management of tourism development. At its core, and this is something I have to say often in the Bahamas, tourism is a business, and the Bahamas Ministry of Tourism, like other national destination marketing and management organizations, has been charged with facilitating the growth and development of this commercial industry, specifically for the purpose of supporting our country's continued socio-economic strength and development. We take this responsibility seriously, and so we have placed data and evidence at the heart of our processes so that we could find and maintain balance in addressing the needs of our many and diverse tourism stakeholders, including, for example, foreign investors, different types of visitors, our local industry partners, and the many Bahamians who work in the tourism industry and sector, while seeking to maintain the profitability of the sector as a whole for the good of the country. Indeed, we have found reliable statistical evidence to be a key element of a sound, comprehensive, evidence-based approach to destination marketing, and a key input to the many strategic decisions that must be made. There is no substitute for being able to delve deeply into the data to inform marketing and planning efforts, as well as corrective measures. For these purposes, we have worked hard to put ourselves in the position of having access to copious amounts of data collected from our stopover visitors through, as has been mentioned, our immigration card system, and most recently, our digital travel health visa survey, as well as surveys of our cruise and stopover passengers, and data on hotel performance collected from local industry participants, and even surveys of local attitudes towards tourism. Our own data is backed up by the studies and surveys done by a variety of external entities that also analyze tourism performance and economic contribution, tourist demographics, motivations and interests, travel patterns, and visitor satisfaction. This data not only tells us about direct tourism revenues and visitor numbers, but also gives insight into what we are doing right, and also where we need to improve as a destination and as a facilitator for the aspirations of our local tourism stakeholders to drive the evolution of strategy over time as we balance the concern for commercial growth with the public interest. Just as our own tourism industry participants, that's investors, hoteliers, airlift providers, and local business persons, rely on data to make their strategic decisions, so the Ministry of Tourism has become more adept at applying sound evidence and data to supporting its strategy decisions and policy recommendations. Thanks in part to the use of data, the Bahamas' stopover visitor arrivals had trended upwards for a decade, that is until COVID-19 hit, achieving an historic high in 2019. The ministry now tracks more data points and invests more in statistics and data analysis than we have ever done before, as we seek to maximize performance both in the tourism sector and within the ministry itself. Further, the ministry acknowledged the need for the improved measurement and isolation of the contribution of tourism to our national economy, including GDP, employment, and other relevant indicators. Therefore, we have collaborated with the Department of Statistics, the Central Bank of the Bahamas, and the Ministry of Finance to implement the UNWTO's Tourism Satellite Account. This initiative is working towards producing a credible and sustainable set of accounts by which to measure tourism's direct economic contribution and its multiple overlapping linkages throughout our economy. We see this work as being very important to inform policymakers as they consider the overarching national concerns and priorities, potentially enabling a more consistent basis for comparison, as has been stated, with other industrial sectors, and providing justification for government policy and financial support of the tourism sector. The TSA also provides further insights to the ministry, including by highlighting which tourism activities are most beneficial to the economy and quantifying how other industrial sectors benefit from tourism. Globally, the TSA provides an accepted international standard for benchmarking and creating a framework for more accurate forecasting. Overall, our ministry aims to see improved profitability from tourism, including cruise tourism, with improved quality in the tourism product and improved returns from each visitor, while providing for improved opportunities for Bahamians and addressing our various issues and problems as a tourism destination and a place where Bahamians live and work. We believe that with proper evidence-based strategic management, benefiting from the use of a broad and reliable statistical base, tourism will continue to make a valuable contribution to the sustainable development of the islands of the Bahamas. I thank you very much. And of course, I remain available and ready to answer any questions that may arise. Thank you, Hernan.
Thank you very much, Joy. That was an excellent presentation. It's always encouraging to see the amount of data that can be created at the national level and how it's being used for policy shaping and decisions. This is it's just a great presentation. Thank you very much. Now I would like to introduce, also we have another very interesting example. We have also the honor of having Ms. Janelle Ray Bowie from Jamaica. She's the Senior Director of Tourism Economics and Facilitation from the Ministry of Tourism, and she will share their experiences of Jamaica in the use of TSA and tourism statistics. Janelle, the floor is all yours.
Hi, good morning, everyone. Thank you for that introduction, Hernan. Is everybody seeing my screen? I hope. Are you seeing it in slideshow format? No. Okay, you should be seeing it in slideshow, all right? Correct? Okay, so thank you again. Good morning, everybody. So a warm welcome from Jamaica. It's nice and warm out here. I hope everybody's having good weather as well. Great presentation so far, I must say. It has definitely had us thinking a little bit more. I've been writing a lot of notes. So thank you everybody for your presentations before, very, very insightful. So I will just quickly be talking about the tourism satellite accounts and how that information has influenced policy and some of the gaps that we're realizing in terms of where we want to go. So I'm going to go ahead now. And then, as I said, I'm open to questions after. I'm also joined here. The Statistical Institute of Jamaica is here. The Planning Institute of Jamaica is here. Jamaica Tourist Board is represented, as well as other parties from the Ministry of Tourism. So we are all here to answer questions if necessary. Thank you. So I just want to go into the format of how things are done in Jamaica now. So I know we've said a lot, Hernan, you've said a lot, Bahamas has said a lot, and Mr. Millington has said a lot about the importance of satellite accounts and the importance of collecting data. So just kind of wanted to let everybody know that our data, as might be similar with some of the other countries. So we have Jamaica Tourist Board, who collects the visitor arrivals, visitor expenditure, length of stay, purpose of travel, visitor profile, that kind of information. So, and then we also have the Statistical Institute of Jamaica, who is responsible for collecting and compiling the TSA, which is a mass amount of information that we get from Statin. Then we have the Planning Institute of Jamaica, which does some of that as well. And we have the Tax Administration of Jamaica, who collects the revenue information. We have the Bank of Jamaica and the Jamaica Promotions Corporation. So as I said, JTB, visitor arrivals, foreign exchange earnings, number of rooms, employment in the accommodation subsector, while you know that Statin would collect employment for tourism overall in terms of the different subsectors. JTB also collects visitor experience and satisfaction, which you know is critical in terms of how we improve our product here in Jamaica. So that is through the same surveys that I think Mr. Millington spoke about in terms of when we look at the visitors' expenditure, their satisfaction, what are they spending on, and that kind of thing. Statin, as I said, looks at the tourism labor force, and you're not seeing the presenter view. You're seeing slideshow or presenter view? Sorry, I just want to make sure. Hernan, if you could just tell me.
Yeah, we're seeing the presenter view. I mean,
okay.
if you can, I don't know if it's possible to change it.
Otherwise,
Otherwise, it's okay, I think. But if you can change it.
Okay. All right. And it comes up here as slideshow view. Let me just see if I could.
Otherwise, we can see the slides, so it's not a big, a very important problem, a very big problem.
Okay, 1 second. I'll just fix it. Right here. Current. No, still seeing it as slideshow, presenter view or slideshow?
We're still seeing our presenter view.
Okay, all right. Well, if I can't fix it, I may just.
It's okay. I think if you can't fix it, it's okay. I think we can still see the slides.
Okay.
So,
okay.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So I will do my best with what we have here. So as long as you're seeing it, I know I would have wanted you to see it bigger and broader, but it's okay as long as you're seeing it. So we also have the Tax Administration of Jamaica, which we know looks at the general consumption tax that we collect from the sector, the guest accommodation room tax, which is paid by only accommodations, and the revenue for the tourism entities, because that is critical. So, and then we have the Bank of Jamaica and the Jamaica Promotions Corporation, which looks at the foreign direct investments and the foreign exchange earnings by major sources. So what do we, so I kind of want to just kind of segue into what information do we get from the satellite accounts and how useful is that for us? So what we normally do, we do know that the satellite accounts provide us with the direct contribution to GDP. So we look at the tourism characteristics, which is accommodation, food and beverage, recreational, passenger transport. So it looks at the different components in terms of the characteristics, the direct contribution, expenditure, the value added, but we have it both at current prices and constant prices I find that sometimes when we share these presentations and we advise people of the change from a constant price perspective, we realize that we're not growing as fast as we could be growing. So a lot of the growth is being assumed by inflation, foreign exchange changing, and that kind of thing. So the constant price is it humbles us, trust me, to let us know that there's a lot more work to be done. And then, as I said, we look at the characteristics and then we look at the rate of growth. So what we're able to do from the TSA is look at the rate of growth for the tourism sector compared to other industries and compared to the growth in the overall economy. So for most of the years, we find that the tourism sector has outgrown the economy, which is excellent. But then because of the retention issues and the retention of that dollar, because we do know that 80% of our room stock is foreign owned. So what is really staying here? So that's it. Those are some of the things that I'll go into in a second. So as I said here, what do we get from the TSA? We have the tourism characteristics. So if we look at this pie chart here, we'll see that most of the contribution comes from the accommodation services for the visitors. And while that is great, it is slightly concerning because the bookings that are made to the accommodations, that money, we don't even see it many times because it's paid to a company in Spain and that kind of thing. So we're not necessarily seeing the retention of that. But nonetheless, it is what it is. Accommodation represents 50% of the characteristics. And then we have passenger transport services, travel agencies, recreational sports and cultural services, food and beverage, transport, and tourism-related recreational. And we can see how that is dispersed with the rest of the groups. So this is an interesting picture here. When we look at the tour, and this is straight from the TSA, by the way, so I have to thank Satin for this information. So when we look at if you look over the years from 2009 to 2019, we are seeing where this is the direct contribution and it's at constant prices. So we're seeing where the accommodation, which is in orange, which is what I've said before, is a direct contribution, but everybody else is everything else. You follow what I'm trying to say? And if the tourism expenditure that is made to the accommodation is not staying in Jamaica, then we need to create more policies to boost the other services that support the tourism sector, because that will allow for more retention, better economic impact, and those kinds of things. So the TSA, as I said, humbles us and lets us know that, well, we have a lot more work to do for the other investments that need to happen. So it's not just a brick and mortar of the big hotel that's coming here with 500 rooms or 2,000 rooms. What are the supporting factors around that are going to allow for the dollar to stay in Jamaica for that retention and less leakages? So it allows us to assess the direct contribution, as I said before, and it allows us to look at the contribution by subsector. So for example, we support the ground transportation providers through concessions, motor vehicle concessions. We support attraction through the incentives. But how can we boost the investment in those subsectors? How can we make Jamaica more attractive from that perspective? What are the investments in cultural assets, if you follow what I'm trying to say? Because that is where you get the entrepreneurship. You get the community tourism. The visitor is coming to explore Jamaica and not just come and stay in a 5-star hotel for 8 days and he never comes out, apart from when he's going to the airport and coming from the airport. So we also, with the TSA, we're able to focus on the subsectors that need growth and policy intervention. So are our policies actually conducive to growing smaller subsectors of the tourism industry? Are they, or are we just promoting big, as I said before, big investments, 500-room hotels? And it allows us to assess our policies with the level of growth of the sector. So, for example, and I think I'll touch it on my other slide. So we have a tourism linkages program, which we look at linking the different sectors such as agriculture and manufacturing with the tourism sector. So what is grown here can be used by tourists. What is manufactured here can be used in the tourism sector. And that is critical because that is how you get the economic impact. That is how, when our local farmers are able to supply the hotels with bananas, if you get what I'm saying, that's huge, instead of us importing bananas or importing beds or importing furniture. So actually what we are trying to do is to determine if our policies are in line with that push. So for example, right now we have a fiscal incentives policy that allows for visitors to import certain items duty-free. Now, how is that facilitating local tourism? If it's easier for them to get the product overseas and import it, then that is totally contradicting what it is that we're trying to push for. So what about giving them incentives on local purchases? What about giving them GCT benefits on local purchases? So those are some of the things that we are able to look at when we look at the results of the TSA. So there are some gaps which we really want to address, and we're working with Statin, we're working with our international partners and our local partners as well. Right now, we are only able to measure the direct impact of the tourism sector. So the indirect and the induced. So the farmer, as I said, who is supplying to the tourism sector, we're not able to claim him as he's a part of tourism's contribution, if you follow what I'm trying to say. So the TSA doesn't capture the link between tourism and the other sectors that support the tourism sector. So as I said before, so the ministry is unable to accurately assess the impact of the following. So the tourism linkages. So the tourism linkages has been around since I think 2013, but we're not able, I mean, our internal surveys were able to ascertain some growth, but we're not able to use, and what Hernan said in terms of the transparent process through the TSA, through Statin, to assess that progress. And that is important for the TSA to now tell us if what the ministry has been doing for the last 7 years, if we're actually able to see it, if we can taste it, if it's tangible for us to say, yes, the Statistical Institute of Jamaica says that our indirect growth has increased. And I mean, we have to remember that while the UNWTO or the WTTC might be able to tell us what our indirect and induced is, that information is always best coming from Jamaica, from Jamaica's statistical offices. Consumers are more convinced when it is Jamaican offices who have advised them of that. And as we said, we're not able to look at the leakages and the retention rate through the TSA. So just some of the priority areas for the Ministry of Tourism, as we said, we want to now find a way to assess the retention and the leakages of the tourism dollar. We're not able to accurately put a number to it. We have been in discussion with UNWTO with the measurement of sustainable tourism, and my colleague Osborne Chin is going to give his presentation on that a little bit later. As I mentioned, the tourism incentives and benefits. What are we gaining for what we're giving up? We're giving up a lot in taxes and duty waivers and that kind of thing. But what are we gaining from tourism investments? That's important. The linkages, as I mentioned before, labor market studies, which Statin has produced very robust labor market reports for us. And we also wanted to start to do some more internal work on that. And we also want to look at the investment in cultural assets. We do know how many rooms are coming, but what about the entrepreneurship, the community tourism enterprises? What are the investments like for those kinds of products? And we also want to prioritize the tourism socioeconomic impact for the tourism sector. So I just want to give just a brief one slide about we actually, from the Ministry of Tourism, we have been using data kind of in a sideline way. We haven't been using it as prominently as we should. We have now, the Ministry of Tourism has created a program called Tourism Data Collection and Analysis, which forces us to use data to drive policy. And TSA is going to be one of the major components of that data, along with the Jamaica Tourist Board information on arrivals. So the program is responsible for ensuring access to high quality tourism market intelligence and research relevant to planning the growth of the sustainable development of the Jamaican tourism sector. And I won't go too much into the description, but we have some objectives to develop a framework to guide the ministry in the capture, analysis, and dissemination of the tourism market intelligence and other relevant research. So we want almost everything to be tied to what does the data say? Are we working in vain? Are we overlapping our efforts? What does the data say, and how can we make decisions in keeping with information? So right now we produce, with the inputs from Statin, PIOJ, JTB, Bank of Jamaica, monthly dashboards, quarterly bulletins, We do an annual state of the industry report. We now want to do a risk assessment and risk register, and we want to try and do a report once every 5 years. So a report on investment, a carrying capacity study, an economic impact assessment, because I think we need to keep tabs on things. And you find that with tourism, because it doesn't require a whole lot of intervention, tourists are going to come, if you get what I'm saying. But if we don't keep track of what is happening from an investment perspective, carrying capacity, economic impact assessment, then what are we at the ministry really doing? So I just wanted to underscore that the Ministry of Tourism is committed, and we have made this in presentations before, that we're committing to working with the UNWTO and the CTO in achieving our objectives for the comprehensive data collection and analysis towards the sustainable development of the tourism sector. And as I said, Mr. Osborne Chin will give his presentation on measurement of sustainable tourism a little bit later, which will give you some more information on everything that we're trying to do. And I just want to underscore that we are in Jamaica, we're very big on partnership. Statin has a satellite accounts committee that meets. We have very good relationships with the Jamaica Tourist Board. They're right on the second floor, right on the third floor. You know, we have the Bank of Jamaica, Planning Institute of Jamaica, because we cannot work in silos, and we're very big on cooperation. And we are definitely ready to work further with the UNWTO and the CTO in achieving our objectives. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. And I'm open for questions after. I appreciate the time. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Janelle, for the excellent presentation. Again, another great example, I think, of how a country can use, in this case, TSA data to come to very, very important conclusions, right? And I think we've seen also from both countries how important the cooperation within the country it is between different agencies, namely the National Tourism Administration, the Statistical Institute, the Central Bank, the Ministry of Finance, etc. I'm trying to see if there's any questions. I don't see any. Currently, there were a few before that were responded. Let me see. There's one from Sherma Beru. Let me see. Okay, it's talking about different challenges that have been found in terms of getting to compile a TSA in the OECS region. And if we can recommend some strategies that can be used to help OECS countries to build and nurture the partnership between the NSO and the data sources for TSA. I think there were some examples that were mentioned from Leandri's presentation as well, and well, from also presentations from Bahamas and Jamaica. I would, in this sense, I think it's a very country-specific or a very region-specific issue, but would be, I mean, maybe something we can discuss later on directly. I mean, again, you will have our contacts, so please feel free to reach out to us in UNWTO and CTO for these issues, for these types of issues. There were also another question before. There were also a few questions that have been answered already. You can check them on the question and answer box. We don't have that much time right now. I think we're a bit behind. We don't have that much time for discussions. But I did want to post. There was a poll now that we would like to post to maybe to the attendees. I don't know if somebody if either Faye or Sharon could. Perfect. It's been posted. So I'm going to ask all the attendees, if possible, to respond to this poll. I think it'd be a good idea maybe to take 5 minutes now to respond and take 5 minutes. We have a break now, so we can take these 5 minutes, come back at I think it's 11:30 32, if that's okay, and we'll continue and we'll look at the results of the poll as well. Thank you very much, and see you in 5 minutes again, and we'll continue with this very interesting discussion and very interesting workshop. Hello, everyone. We're back after the 5-minute break. You went very fast. I don't know if you can see the results. Perfect. We're sharing the results now, so everyone can see the results of the poll. You can see that by a big majority, it was the lack of cooperation between the data producers and potential users, one of the main reasons and one of the main obstacles to producing TSA. And on a second spot, it was the lack of technical expertise as well. But it seems like many of the categories got some quite a bit of countries, of participants selecting them, even lack of funding, lack of underlying statistics, lack of political engagement as well. I think this also builds on the comment previously by the colleague from the referring to the OECS, saying that there were many barriers to producing the TSA. So I was wondering if anyone anyone would like to share maybe their experience, their maybe successful experience in this initial cooperating between data producers and data users from one of the countries. We saw some examples today from Jamaica and the Bahamas, where there seems to be quite a good cooperation between the two. But maybe some country or somebody would like to also share their experiences. I don't see anyone asking to participate, to contribute, but that's okay. I think we can maybe move on to the next session. Again, as a conclusion to these poll results, I think it seems like there is a need to reach out to cooperate between different agencies, producers and users, and that is one of the main barriers. I think this is a very interesting conclusion from this. Also, the lack of technical expertise, which I hope initiatives such as this one can start helping with this. Maybe there is a chance to potentially have a regional capacity building program in the future, also in the region. This could be something very, very interesting that could help train and build some technical expertise in the countries of the Caribbean as well. So I'll move on now to the next step, the next session, or the next item, which is on COVID-19, the measuring and monitoring of the impact. I'll have a presentation first. Well, I'll talk a little bit about the global and regional state of affair, and then we have a very interesting presentation from Grenada on the measurement of the impact. So I will now share my screen to provide my presentation. I'll try to go relatively quickly as we're a bit behind in the schedule. So I'll talk a bit first about the pre-COVID-19 situation, what was happening before, then about the impact of COVID-19 on tourism activity, and then I'll touch briefly also on the impact on tourism statistics. So there's one issue on tourism activity, but also on the compilation of statistics and how COVID has impacted this. So the pre-COVID situation, where you can see that between 1995 and even earlier until 2019, there was a very consistent and significant increase in both arrivals at the global level and expenditure and inbound tourism expenditure. Arrivals went from a bit over 500 million in 95 to over 1,400 million in 2019. Expenditure went for about $400 billion in 95 to of almost 1,500 billion in 2019. So it almost pretty much more than tripled in this period. If you look at the situation in 2019, we can see that tourism expenditure represents about 7% of global exports. And if we look at only services exports at the global level, they represent 28%. There's also a big contribution of tourism to employment. If you can see here that employment in tourism industries has increased at a much higher rate than employment in general since in the last 20 years. At the global level, with the country we have data for, which is almost 100 countries, we can see that employment in tourism industries grew at a 3.8% growth average annually, while for the whole economy, it grew at 1.4%. If you look specifically in Latin America and the Caribbean, these annual growth rates are about 1.7 and 3.5, so about twice as fast it grew in tourism than in tourism industries than in the rest of the economies, the rest of the economy. If we look, this is looking at the 2018 to 2019 change in the Americas. So now we're looking at the pre-COVID situation in the Americas. In 2019, with respect to the previous year, the Caribbean was the sub-region in the Americas that saw the highest increase, 3% in arrivals and 5% in expenditure. And then if we look at the data for 2019, we can see that if you look at arrivals, the Caribbean represents about 12% of all the Americas, behind 16% of South America and 67% of North America. But if you look at expenditure, the Caribbean is the second most important sub-region within the Americas after North America. And the Caribbean represents about 10% of all tourism inbound expenditure in the region, in the Americas, even more than in South America when we look at international tourism. So the impact, this was the situation pre-COVID. What is the impact of COVID on tourism activity? Well, it's, as you know, very, very steep and very, very deep. Here we can see the effect on international tourist arrivals for 2020. They went down by 74% from about 1.5 billion in 2019 to 381 million in 2020. The Americas, if we look comparably to the rest of the regions, is the one that's been not affected as much as the other ones, but it's still a 69% decrease, which is a huge fall, of course. This is the biggest fall in history, and it went and the number of arrivals went down to levels of 1990. If we compare it, for example, to the loss on expenditure to the 2009 crisis, it's 11 times the same, the loss of in tourism expenditure, in international tourism expenditure. What do we expect to happen in the next few years? Well, it's expected that international tourist arrivals will return to 2019 levels in 2.5 to 4 years. This is at the global level. However, if you look specifically within the Americas, comparably to the rest of the world, experts are not as optimistic. We did a survey, UNWTO did a survey among experts in different countries and asked them when they expect tourism to rebound in their country. At the global level, about 27% said that they would rebound in the third quarter of 2021, and about 50% said by 2022. If you look at the Americas, the experts are much less optimistic, with almost 60% saying that this will happen in 2022, and only 9% in the third quarter of 2021. Another question that we asked experts was, when do you expect international tourism to return to pre-pandemic 2019 levels in your country? Again, in the Americas, experts were less optimistic than in the rest of the world. About 43%, almost 60% in the world said that they will come back in 2023 or earlier. This percentage for the Americas is around 50%. So the situation, even though maybe 2020 did not impact the Americas as much as in other regions, even though it impacted it greatly, the view for the future is maybe not as optimistic in the Americas in terms of how long it'll take to come back. Now, what is the impact on tourism activity in the Caribbean and in SIDS in general, and also in the Caribbean? So here we can see the countries where inbound tourism expenditure represents more than 1/4, more than 25% of national GDP. As you can see, these are 18 countries where this happens, and you see 12 of the 18 are in the Caribbean at the global level. This is worldwide. And 17 of the 18 are actually SIDS, with except of Macau. So this shows that tourism, especially international tourism, is extremely, extremely important in the Caribbean, arguably more than in other regions. Another characteristic we see from SIDS and countries in the Caribbean is how diversified the source markets are. As you can see, this graph shows the percentage of arrivals represented by the top 3 countries of origin. So if we look at the top 3 countries of origin for each country, how much do they represent in terms of total arrivals? If you look within the Caribbean, SIDS in the Caribbean, this percentage is roughly on average around 75%. If we look at other SIDS, it's similar. But if you look at countries that are non-SIDS, this is below 50%. So the top 3 countries represent less than 50% in the rest of the world. So this shows that source markets in the Caribbean and in SIDS in general are not very diversified. If you look also at where these source markets are, we can see that in the Caribbean, Europe and the US are the main sources. For some countries, they represent more than 80% of total arrivals. In some cases, even more than 85%. So as the US and Europe are the main sources that require, of course, long-haul air travel in general to islands in the Caribbean. So the international tourism in the Caribbean relies heavily on this long-haul air travel, which may not be which is the type of tourism that is most affected during the COVID pandemic. If you look at, we try to look also at domestic tourism. We couldn't find much data, but we found data for 5 different SIDS: Cabo Verde, Cuba, Fiji, Seychelles, and Timor-Leste. As you can see, from domestic accommodation overnights, they represent less than 20% of total accommodation overnights. So, and in some cases, less than 5%. Again, this is very little data we have, but we couldn't find more data. But it seems in general that, and I think this is something that you are much more aware than myself, at least, that effectively domestic tourism markets are relatively small in Caribbean countries, especially when compared to international tourism. So what are the main characteristics that we saw? There's a high economic importance, especially of international tourism, and diversified or not very diversified source markets. International tourism that requires long-haul air travel, which in the context of COVID is the one that is most affected, because many countries resorted to short distance travel, let's say even at the international level. and small domestic tourism markets, which also some of the countries that were able to, partially compensate the impact from more domestic tourism. Maybe that's not so available to countries in the Caribbean. So this situation makes it extremely difficult for these countries to react to the global crisis. If you look at now specifically at the impact of COVID-19 on arrivals, here we can see that in the first quarter of 2020, they decreased by 24% with respect to the first quarter of 2019, by almost 97% in second quarter, 81% in the third quarter, and 74% in the fourth quarter. For the total year, it was an accumulated fall of 67% in Caribbean countries, estimated based on preliminary data. So this is, of course, an extremely huge impact on these countries. You can see some examples based on preliminary data here for individual countries. So it's obviously there was the effect of the crisis was unprecedented at the global level, but specifically for the Caribbean, it was a very important impact, and it was the situation in general in these countries makes them more vulnerable also to these types of shocks. There's also an impact on tourism statistics. I won't spend much time on this because of lack of time, I think, but I wanted to show you within a survey among countries to see how the statistical activities have been impacted also by COVID because of social distancing, closure of borders, limited mobility. It was not possible to maybe carry some surveys face-to-face or even border surveys since borders were closed, they were not possible. So you can see here that almost 80% of countries had to cancel or postpone the border surveys. Only 20% were able to maintain the collection as usual of household surveys and accommodation surveys. And in terms of administrative sources, this is, I think, a good message. Let's say the little silver lining in the situation is that administrative sources were not so heavily affected. And even in some countries, they were able to use, in 20% of the countries, they were able to use administrative sources as initiatives to complement other sources that were heavily affected. I will go quickly through this. I mentioned before that we created guidance on how to measure certain aspects of tourism in the context of COVID. You can see here the link. Please feel free to reach out to us as well if you have any questions on this. This was the result of a very long, very comprehensive consultation process that include countries, international organizations, etc. So I think it's a very interesting document for statistics compilers, for tourism statistics compilers. And also there was an impact, another important thing I think in the impact of the COVID was that it made many governments reassess and rethink the whole strategy in terms of tourism statistics. So there was changes in thematic priorities. I think it's clear there's a bigger importance of TSA as a tool to assess the impact of crisis. This is something that was also mentioned, I think, by the Bahamas. How I was able to use TSA to do forecasting. And this is something that many countries have used their TSA structure to be able to assess the impact of the COVID crisis. There needs to be a close dialogue between users and producers of data. I think during COVID, we could see this in many countries. There was more need for more up-to-date data, for new indicators, and data producers had to respond to this need. There's a need to ensure the continuity of data collection initiatives, and this can be done, for example, by using new collection modes, such as over the phone or over the websites, or using new sources of data, such as, for example, administrative sources or even big data in some cases. The importance also of measuring domestic tourism. Again, many countries changed to domestic tourism and relied on domestic tourism to at least compensate for some of the impact. So there's also a need to measure this type of tourism, which is not widely measured at the global level. And finally, the importance of measuring of the sustainable tourism policies and the measuring of this aspect of tourism, of which we will talk about more in detail in the next session, in the next item. So this is all from my side. I try to go as quickly as possible to introduce this topic. We also have a colleague from Grenada. We have the honor of having Miss Samantha Thomas Klein, a research officer from the Grenada Tourism Authority, who will talk about the experience of Grenada in measuring the impact of COVID-19 in Grenada. Samantha, the floor is all yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Epstein. Can everyone see my screen? Can everyone hear me? See my screen? Very well. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone, wherever you're located. My name is Samantha Thomas Klein. I'm the research officer of the Grenada Tourism Authority. Just to give an overview, we are the ones responsible for compiling and producing tourism statistics in Grenada. It's a very small contingent of us. It's 2 of us, and we're supported by 2 data entry officers. We form part of the product development and research department. So we are trusted with the responsibility of providing research and statistics to our marketing team to market Destination Grenada. In addition, we are also responsible for producing official tourism statistics, which supports the Central Statistics Office. We work closely with them, and as we go into the presentation, you would see how we work together to achieve the number of things we've had. Okay. Just need to minimize this. Right. So of course, everyone knows that most of the Caribbean islands closed their borders in March, April of 2020. Grenada closed their borders on March 23rd, 2020 to all visitor arrivals. We were basically on lockdown. We had 0 visitor arrivals during the month of April, and we basically reopened our borders on July 15th to visitor arrivals again. If we take a quick look at our comparative data, you can see that our cruise arrivals declined by 52%, our stayover declined by 73%, and our yachting declined by 58%. Our tourism expenditure declined by 74%. If you see, take a look at that line graph, we have a sudden drop in our expenditure, and our tourism employment figure, our latest figure we got from the Central Statistical Office Labor Force Survey, showed a decline of 54% in employment in the industry. As a result of the immediate effects of COVID, we embarked on a number of different research initiatives, 2 of which we collaborated with the George Washington University, the CTO, and also the Travel Foundation. We worked with some master's level students to basically come up with a strategy to help Grenada basically deal with the immediate impacts of COVID. And some of the outputs were a market analysis, which we came up with a profile of the new or evolving visitor, which we will go more into the next slide. We came up with a COVID-19 dashboard, which was supposed to be a one-stop shop, basically provide us with all of the information. We also came up with a strategy to support small businesses in the industry, and we came up with some recommendations which we've shared. And we also came up with an accommodation toolkit. So the things you must have in order to support the new requirements of due to increased health restrictions and hygiene. And the Travel Foundation, the results were a Routes to Recovery report, which basically states the bolster resilience and risk management recommendation. Right? We came up with a profile of the new visitor. We basically highlighted that there will be a demographic shift in our visitors. Ideally, pre-COVID, our visitors were between the ages of 45 to 64. Now the research is showing that a younger demographic is more open and willing to travel in the immediate future as opposed to the older demographic. Affordability is at the forefront. A major influencing factor, it's uncrowded, vaccines available, and we've recently seen a number of our islands having received their COVID-19 vaccines. So we should see some more developments as it relates to the correlation between increased vaccination and increased visitor arrivals. But of course, we are monitoring as it rolls out. Also, there are preferences in accommodation, which provides protective tools, explains and communicates the cleaning procedures, requires employee to do regular health screening. So to inform the visitor as to what are the new requirements by the different accommodations. And the travels, interests and activities, we are now seeing a shift into adventure, health and wellness, tourism, and bucket list tourism. And the booking behavior, we're seeing a slight change as well, where of course people are utilizing online platforms and they are looking at information about destinations through social media. So destinations now have to increase their communication as it relates to not only what is happening at the destination, but the entry requirements to enter that destination. Sorry, and of course, they would book 3 to 6 months in advance. Another project we have embarked upon was the tourism satellite account. We have been through phase 1 and phase 2. Phase 1, we had a readiness assessment. Our consultant was Ms. Maureen Blockland and Annette McKenzie. It was a partnership with the Central Statistical Office. We've done the groundwork. We've met with different stakeholder groups to get buy-in. And I think that is something, there was a question earlier about, what is impacting stakeholders' willingness to engage in a TSA. And I think what is important is building relationships and basically having a relationship to get the information, because I'm not sure if it's a cultural thing, but it's their reluctance to share data. I don't know if it's due to taxes or whatever the case may be, but there is a reluctance to share data. As we go on to our session tomorrow, we'll go more into what we've done as it relates to the industries, getting information on industries, the accommodation, the dive, the yachting. So we will get more into that tomorrow. And phase 2, we've completed tables 1 to 6 and 10. After this, we are looking to move into phase 3 of the TSA. Of course, we are waiting on our partners, the Central Statistical Office, to complete the supply and use table with Statistics Canada. So their activity affects our next step. So we have to work closely in getting to the next step. But as it is in Grenada, tourism is measured by accommodation and restaurants only, which is highly understated, of course. So we've initiated the project to really see what is tourism's real contribution to tourism in Grenada. We have been taking notes from the earlier presentations as it relates to getting a completed TSA done. So we look forward to reaching out to find out more information to get us to the next step. We've also been doing a lot of surveys on the ground. Immediately after COVID, we did a business impact survey to basically see how many of our tourism enterprises were impacted by COVID, how many this information was used to support the stimulus packages that the government issued to different stakeholder partners because of the fall off of COVID. We've also been doing a lot of destination panels. We've recently done a willingness to travel. During the pandemic, we found that potential visitors are willing to travel. However, there is an additional cost to quarantine. Some have to quarantine at the destination and upon their return home. So imagine having to spend 2 weeks at a quarantine facility at the destination and 2 weeks when you get back home. That's a month of quarantine, 0 vacation days. We recently did a travel agents support survey. We're basically trying to see what it is that we can do to help you at least get Grenada at the top of mind for potential visitors once this COVID things end, or once the vaccine rolls out successfully and people are confident to travel again. We have also been utilizing our market intelligence platform. We've been using global data. We've also been using some reports from Euromonitor as well to tap into what are the trends, what are the emerging trends, and how can we position ourselves to be ready for when Grenada opens to full capacity. Tourism performance, as highlighted earlier, we've seen declines, of course, and we are expecting to start seeing growth by March of this year, because last year we literally had 0 arrivals. This graph shows that of all of our visitor arrivals, we have 76% being cruise, 19 stay over, and 5% yacht. You also see that the expenditure, that the 19% of stay over arrivals contribute to 75% of tourism expenditure in Grenada. So if we are looking at value, you would see that the stay over is most valuable to us, followed by the yacht, then the cruise. Outlook, at the end of Q1, we are expecting to still see declines of 97% at the end of March of this year. And of course, this is highly dependent on the evolving visitor profiles, airlift, government policies, and any changes in our source markets, because we are highly dependent on our traditional markets, which is the USA, UK, Canada. So as we've noticed over the past months, it has been evolving, whether it's the entry requirement that has been shifted every 2 weeks, or it is changes in the market which affects us. So we are basically monitoring what is happening, and we will adjust our requirements and strategies to target and prepare ourselves. And I think that is it for us. If you have any questions, you could send us a message and we will answer.
Thank you very much, Samantha, for this very, very interesting presentation. I think it's great to see how quickly you were able to adapt and to profile these new travelers, and it's quite impressive, to be honest. And honestly, the main message here is that you need the data to be able to do that as well. So it's great to see how this can help. Also, you mentioned, I think also touching upon the question from the person referring to the OECS, on the reluctance to share data of businesses in general. I think maybe potentially two ways in which this could be minimized, or at least solved partially, is through the use of administrative data, maybe in such as compulsory reports or tax reports that companies need to provide, and also social security data for issues for the subject of employment, and also on the other side, building up also more on the demand side and not on the supply side, and trying to also build and strengthen that side of the data ecosystem. So going back to that issue as well, I thought it was a very interesting insight that you gave there as well. Okay, I don't know if there's any questions or any. I'm going to see. I don't see any questions in general in the Q&A. There was a question on domestic tourism on the chat, and I think I try to respond to it on the importance of measuring domestic tourism and which new modes and sources could be used. Samantha, there's a question on to you, if Grenada conducted service via phone during COVID. I don't know if you want to reply to that.
I'm sorry. Yes, that is an option that we've looked at as well. We're also moving into digitization of our surveys, because we've moved from doing monthly expenditure survey to not doing them at all. And tomorrow as well, we would go into how we derive at our expenditure estimates in the absence of a survey, which is pretty interesting, but that's an option. We've been utilizing online survey platforms as well, which we find that, you know, the response rates are pretty low, but you have to be pushing constant reminders with online surveys. So it works for us as well, but we're still, you know, trying to see what is the best way, especially for our expenditure survey, to get back into that. In addition to that, we are moving into online ED cards, the embarkation and disembarkation card as well. We will be capturing email addresses. We also, of course, we have to get permission to use those email addresses, and that is a way to send out a survey to our visitors after they've left. So that is an option for us, but telephone as well. And I'm sorry, I did not add a next part of our TSA phase 3 is to do a domestic tourism survey as well. So that is in the works for us.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Samantha. Thank you. Thanks a lot. So now, as I don't see any more questions, I'll move on to item 5 on measuring the sustainability, measuring the tourism role for sustainable development. I'll pass the virtual floor to my colleague Clara van der Pol, who would make a presentation on this, and then we'll hear from some countries. Clara, the floor is all yours.
Thank you, Hernan. First of all, can you see my screen and hear me correctly? Great. So it really is a pleasure to be here with you today. We've had some really excellent presentations, and I'm very thankful to be able to be part of this discussion and to learn from all of you. Now, I'm also delighted to have the opportunity to tell you a little bit about UNWTO's efforts to support statistics for measuring the sustainability of tourism and for monitoring the role of tourism in the Sustainable Development Goals. Now, while you may have gathered this already from the previous presentations, I dare to ask anyway, what is statistics? Well, statistics comes from the word states, and the main purpose when they were developed in the 18th century was to provide information to help manage the state. This is still fundamentally the case, although the idea has broadened and evolved somewhat. For example, the UK Statistics Authority promotes official statistics that serve the public good. This includes public policy, but also the public itself. They put it very nicely when they state that the mission of official statistics is to mobilize the power of data to make better decisions. Statistics deals with data, inevitably, but with a special kind of data. To paraphrase Rademacher, the former Director General of Eurostat, data is given, statistics is produced. For example, how can we discuss tourism promotion or mobility plans if we can't first agree on how many visitors are entering a destination? Or how can we design COVID recovery packages for the tourism sector in these times when we haven't first agreed on how many tourism businesses there are or how many people they employ? Statistics provides us this common ground, this common language for comparable data to better understand the world around us. The statistical process from raw data to decisions is outlined here. Every step to the right means a further refinement of the data to ensure this common ground and to ensure that it suits data needs. Standards play a crucial role in going from raw data to basic statistics and also in going from basic statistics to accounts and indicators. In tourism, as you have seen, we have standards for basic statistics and for tourism accounts, the so-called tourism satellite accounts. Together, they provide a common language for measuring important aspects of tourism in a way that's comparable and credible to support decisions on tourism. And what are these decisions about? In other words, what is the mission of tourism statistics? Well, we can refer to the internationally agreed definitions of tourism. Tourism is a social, cultural, and economic phenomenon related to the movement of people outside their usual place of residence. Tourism has an impact on the economy, on the natural and the built environment, on the local population at the places visited, and on the visitors themselves. So we need statistics on these various aspects of tourism. However, the existing standards for tourism are primarily focused on measuring visitor flows and their characteristics and on the economic dimension of tourism. As we can see in this cartoon, many challenges lie ahead. The pandemic and restarting tourism is one of them, and certainly the most immediate, but possibly not the most defying. To be prepared to inform on these issues, we need to expand our system of tourism statistics. The economic focus of the existing standards is important, but looking ahead, a more holistic measurement of tourism is needed for a more holistic management of tourism to be able to tackle these challenges. Now, Joseph Stiglitz has warned us, what we measure affects what we do. And if we measure the wrong thing, we will do the wrong thing. For example, if we only measure visitor arrivals, it's understandable that attention gets directed at increasing visitor arrivals. If sustainability is going to be a priority, we must make measuring it a priority also. And this is why UNWTO is accompanying an international effort for measuring the sustainability of tourism. It can be broadly understood as consisting of 3 pillars. We have the development of an international standard, and this entails on the one hand an important technical work of developing the measurement framework, and at the same time also a big international consensus building effort. The implementation of this standard through pilots and capacity building and technical, or that UNWTO can support through capacity building and technical support would be the second pillar. And ultimately, these stages give way to the compilation of this data into international data sets, national data sets, but also the compilation of good practices. Now, international organizations such as UNWTO are particularly well placed to accompany the development of standards. Why is that? Well, because an international standard is fundamentally an international consensus. There are, of course, important technical elements, but these have strategic and political implications in countries. Measuring something one way or another affects the results. International organizations can facilitate the international engagement necessary to develop these standards on the technical level and also to support the consensus building effort. In fact, statistics is an explicit part of our mandate at UNWTO as a UN specialized agency. Here is a visual summary of the framework for measuring the sustainability of tourism. The 3 main dimensions of tourism, the economic, the social, and the environmental, are shown as nested systems to reflect how interconnected they are. On the right, you will see key measurement areas for each of these dimensions. So for example, there is a chapter on the environmental dimension that looks at water and energy use by tourism, on waste and emissions produced, the use of land, but also tourism from an ecosystems perspective and relevant biodiversity information. A social chapter looks at decent work, health, education and skills, income and wealth, the importance of institutions and governance, gender, culture, heritage. In the economic chapter, we have, of course, things like GDP, but also the performance of different tourism industries, business demographics, how many new businesses start up, how many close down, employment, patterns in visitor expenditure, investment in tourism. The framework builds on existing standards, such as the tourism satellite account, and also standards in related areas of measurement, such as environmental statistics and accounting, employment and social statistics, the measurement of well-being. And when we consider sustainability, it's important to consider the subnational level. And an entire chapter is dedicated to this in the framework as well. Of course, not all of these elements of the framework will be equally relevant in all countries, nor at all spatial levels. The framework tries to be comprehensive, but at the same time responsive to user needs, and it encourages a modular implementation by priority areas. You may be wondering why we need a standard for measuring the sustainability of tourism when it is largely based on existing standards. Well, the way that statistics have evolved over time means that many different statistical domains exist, each with their own standards and to serve their own policy area. So we have a domain on economic statistics to serve economic policy. We have trade statistics, environmental statistics, employment statistics, population statistics. In order to consider sustainability in tourism, it becomes necessary to integrate the bits and pieces from each of these relevant areas. And this is precisely what the MST framework does. It provides the concepts, definitions, classifications, and structures for organizing and integrating the data that matters most to the consideration of sustainability in tourism. The MST framework thus functions in the same way as other standards, complementing them and building upon them. These are some of the partners, engagement mechanisms, and endorsements that are part of the consensus building effort. A multi-stakeholder and multidisciplinary working group of experts is leading the development of the framework. It's chaired by Austria, and it comprises the countries and entities shown on the screen. The MSD process has been endorsed by the UNWTO General Assembly, by the United Nations Statistical Commission, and also by the G20. A dedicated Manila call for action on measuring sustainable tourism was adopted in 2017, rallying the support of over 1,000 leaders in tourism, statistics, private sector, and civil society. And ultimately, the intention is for this framework to become a standard. This gets decided at the United Nations headquarters by the highest decision-making body in statistics, the so-called UN Statistical Commission. Both the technical development and the international consensus need to be sufficiently solid for the UN to endorse a framework, a new framework, such as the MSD framework, as a standard. In the meantime, the framework is already being implemented and tested for both relevance and feasibility in countries around the world through so-called pilot studies. You can see that different pilot studies have implemented different parts of the framework in line with their priorities and circumstances. For example, we can see that in Germany, the gender pay gap in tourism was found to be 22% lower than for the rest of the economy. In the Philippines, domestic tourism was found to use 3 times more water and energy than inbound tourism. In Samoa, where tourism accounts for 13% of GDP and 22% of employment, the water and electricity used by tourism was comparatively lower. In Austria, tourism has a very high acceptance by the local population, earning each Austrian over 2,000 euros a year. In Mexico, data showed the social and economic benefits of archaeological sites and protected areas. And policymakers in the Netherlands were surprised to find that while tourism contributed 4% of value added, it paid comparatively more environmental taxes. And on top of this, the biggest polluters paid fewer environmental taxes. In all cases, the data produced is comparable and the result of integration across different statistical domains with a specific focus on tourism sustainability. More pilots are in the pipeline, and you will hear a little bit about this in some of the experiences to be presented in brief. In time, the idea is that this kind of data on the social, economic, and environmental aspects of tourism will be compiled by UNWTO into an international data set. International data sets are important because they allow benchmarking performance and monitoring the achievement towards common goals, such as the Sustainable Development Goals. To date, and while a lot has still to be done, UNWTO has focused its efforts on developing a data set for the 2 indicators on sustainable tourism that are currently included in the SDG indicator framework for global monitoring. And here we see the data for indicator 12.B.1 on the level of implementation of standard accounting tools. It monitors target 12.B, which is about developing and implementing tools to monitor sustainable tourism. This indicator is based on the MSD framework to provide an indication of the statistical capacity for measuring the sustainability of tourism. It tracks, on the one hand, the implementation of tourism satellite account tables, and on the other hand, the implementation of relevant environmental accounts. These are the accounts on water, on energy, on emissions, and on waste. Looking at the data, we see that in general, uptake has increased notably between 2009 and 2016 reference years. Also, countries are compiling increasing numbers of tables on average in the most recent years. So this is very good news, but of course, there's still a lot of work ahead. The second indicator is tourism direct GDP, which you have seen already in the previous presentations. This helps to monitor target 8.9, which is about the promotion of sustainable tourism. Now we can see from the data shown here that tourism accounts for an important share of many economies. All the more reason to make sure that it's managed sustainably. Of course, tourism GDP can provide valuable information on the promotion of tourism, but it's not sufficient to inform on the promotion of sustainable tourism, which is called for in the target. To do so, the MST framework recommends to use at least 3 measures. One for the economic dimension, which could be tourism GDP, one on the social dimension, such as, for example, employment, and another one on the environmental dimension of tourism. On the whole, perhaps one lesson from this process in the SDG global indicators is that there might still be quite some work to be done to raise awareness within the statistical community about what tourism sustainability is and why it's important in countries. Also, allow me to note that the indicators for global monitoring of the SDGs is just the tip of the iceberg. Monitoring is also taking place at regional and national levels, where there is more flexibility to add indicators and to adapt to country priorities and circumstances. We will be seeing an example on this from Aruba in brief. Finally, allow me to propose 3 takeaways from my presentation. First of all, statistics rely on international standards that provide a common ground, a common language for data that serves the public good. Number 2, measuring the sustainability of tourism is expanding tourism statistics by proposing a standard framework that includes economic, social, and environmental aspects of tourism sustainability. And number 3, both pilot studies and SDG monitoring are showing that MST is a useful and feasible statistical framework in support of policy at the national, subnational, and global levels. Thank you very much. I believe we have a poll coming up before the country presentations, but please correct me, Hernan, if I'm wrong. Thank you very much for your attention again.
Thank you very much, Clara, for the excellent and very clear presentation. Yes, I would like to ask maybe Sharon if it's possible to launch the 2 polls. There's 2 polls related to the measurement of the sustainability of tourism. So I'm going to ask participants also, if possible, to respond to it. I think it's already there. We'll leave it up maybe for 2 minutes, and then we'll move on to the country presentations, if that's okay. Thank you. In the meantime, I have a raised hand by a participant, maybe Sharon Pinas. Maybe can if you can give her the floor. Sharon, I don't know if you wanted to intervene. Maybe not. I think I don't see the raised hand anymore.
She was promoted to panelist, so she can unmute herself and she can speak.
Perfect.
Go ahead, Sharon, you can speak. Unmute yourself first. There's another attendee that I'm going to promote to panelist, Julieta. In the meantime, Juliana, you can go ahead, unmute yourself and you can speak. It doesn't seem like they wish to contribute or comment anymore.
Okay, that's fine. That's fine. So well, I think we have some results now. We'll leave this there open, I think, for participants to continue contributing to the poll. In the meantime, I think we can move on to the country presentations, and we'll leave the results of the poll maybe for the end of the discussion. I'd like to now give the floor. We have the honor also of having Mr.
Sorry, Hernan, I will have to end the poll for it to come off of viewer's screen.
Okay.
Before you can move on.
Okay, well then we can.
Tell me when to end it.
No, we can end it.
100.
We can end it now.
End it now. Okay.
Yes, please. Thank you, Sharon. Perfect. So now we can move on to the country presentations. We have two. I would like to ask Mr. Osborne Chin, Director of Tourism Facilitation in the Ministry of Tourism of Jamaica, to share the experience of Jamaica in measuring the sustainability of tourism. Mr. Osborne, the floor is yours.
All right. Thank you very much, Hernan. Just checking to see if my screen is up and running. And that you can hear me? Yeah, okay. All right, great. Well, good morning, everyone. A special good morning to my fellow panelists and participants. I would like to use this opportunity to thank the UNWTO and the CTO to be a part of this very important workshop on tourism statistics. And of course, Jamaica is very pleased and excited to share the work that we're doing in the area of tourism statistics and the measurement of sustainable tourism. Now, just a brief little background. In 2018, the Ministry of Tourism participated in a workshop towards the measurement of sustainable tourism in Manila. And out of that workshop, the ministry initiated research to guide the development of our very own framework for measuring sustainable tourism. And so this process has been ongoing for the past 3 years. Now, this includes the development of a concept paper to guide the way forward for this framework. And of course, this was done through using the guidance documents and methodologies proposed by the UNWTO, as well as other frameworks for the development and the measurement of sustainable tourism indicators. So just a brief background and context. So as we heard earlier, tourism is one of the most important economic and service sectors in Jamaica, and it directly accounts for over 9.8% of our GDP. In addition, tourism has significant contributions to social development and the overall quality of life of our local communities while addressing economic well-being, cultural and social support, as well as environmental quality. Now, as a cross-cutting sector, tourism stimulates productivity and growth in all other sectors. And we know that tourism is highly intensive and resource-driven. It is also highly dependent on assets such as our natural environment, our climate, our rich and diverse cultural heritage, and of course, our human resources, our people. And we also know that tourism is a source of degradation and environmental damage and pollution, which of course can result in negative changes in the society and negative perception among visitors. And it is for this reason that it is imperative for tourism to be effectively planned and managed, all while embracing the principles of sustainability. And as such, the development of and the implementation of tourism policies and strategies will require appropriate organization, presentation, and information, especially for data on tourism statistics. Now, the Ministry of Tourism, in doing this through the development of a framework that prioritizes the identification and the measurement of sustainable tourism indicators. Now, why are we doing this? Well, this is being done primarily to measure tourism's role in sustainable development. And we hope, as we heard before from Mr. Butler in his opening remarks and from Clara, that we hope to extend the current statistical frameworks that exist to go beyond just an economic focus to include environmental and sociocultural issues. And we're also aiming to integrate our work with the policy direction of the UNWTO's MST framework, which we just heard about, all while improving the collection of data in the tourism sector at all levels and across all sectors. And we're also looking to develop, to implement, and to monitor more robust tourism policies that are hinged on the tenets of sustainability. So right now we are working on a revised tourism master plan, which we're calling the Tourism Strategy and Action Plan. And this revised policy document will have crucial elements of sustainability, of disaster risk reduction, of climate change adaptation. And of course, we're also working on a destination assurance policy, which also involves all of these tenets of sustainability. And lastly, we have to be in alignment with the Sustainable Development Goals, because this is what we're aiming to achieve in the long run, and to achieve the outcomes of our own Vision 2030 development policy. Now, in terms of the main policy issues to be addressed, in order for us to effectively carry out this process, we had to identify these main policy issues to be addressed by the measurement framework. And of course, these policy issues include, firstly, the environmental impacts of tourism. So we have to look at things like our ecosystem disruptions, things like solid waste management and water quality, waste management and energy consumption. We have to look at climate change impacts and of course the resilience to natural disasters. Secondly, we have to look at tourism's dependence on the environment. Do we have healthy ecosystems? How are our beaches doing? What about our coral reefs? Do we have clean water? What about the conditions of our forests and our mangroves? Thirdly, we have to look at the perception and the response of the tourism sector to the environment. Do we have environmental taxes in place? What about environmental protection expenditure by some crucial agencies? And fourthly, we want to look at the social impacts of tourism. How is it contributing to employment? Do we have any social benefits for our tourism workers? Things like pension. Do we have housing for our tourism workers? What about our local traditions and culture? So all of these social impacts will have to be addressed as a key policy issue. And then lastly, we have to look at tourism's dependence on the local social infrastructure. So of course, we want to look at our transportation infrastructure, like our roads and highways. What about hospitals and healthcare facilities? Sewage treatment facilities. Do we have a secondary treatment facility or tertiary treatment facility within our tourism resort areas? Now, in terms of the benefits to Jamaica, so I spoke about why we're doing this, but what about how this will benefit Destination Jamaica? Well, firstly, having a measurement framework that expands on the current economic focus to include sociocultural, environmental statistics, and data that provides a more holistic and sustainable approach to tourism planning and policy. Secondly, it allows for the principles of sustainable tourism to be integrated within our key policy areas. So things like planning and environment and infrastructure, social welfare, industry and commerce, and even finance. So all of these areas will be addressed by this framework. And thirdly, it allows us to provide an accurate performance of the sector, both economically, environmentally, and socially. Now, it also provides for improved institutional capacity and coordination for the collection of data, how we organize the data, how we manage the data, and of course, governance of data and statistics, particularly for tourism-specific data. Now, in talking about sustainable tourism indicators, we have to recognize that indicators are critical for measuring the status or the severity of the policy issues. So they identify and measure the risks and the results of actions. They also measure the changes and impacts caused by tourism, as well as those that affect tourism. And we go right back to our key policy issues. And of course, they can either be qualitative or quantitative. However, they have to be strategic to the sustainability of the destination and by extension, the tourism sector. So we have to first ensure that the indicators will be relevant to the overall process. And we also have to determine the scale of the data collection for these indicators. Are we collecting it at the national level or at the destination level, at the entity level or the property level? So we have to be very careful as to exactly what we're measuring and how we're measuring it. Now, the identification and the measurement of these indicators is a fundamental part of the overall destination planning and management. And I spoke earlier about our tourism strategy and action plan that we're doing. So these indicators are particularly integral in promoting sustainable development in the tourism sector at all scales. And if we fail to identify and measure the impacts of tourism to the long-term sustainability of the destination, then we put the destination at increased risks for future shocks and disruptions. And as you can see right now, in the Caribbean, we've been impacted by a number of different shocks and disruptions, from hurricanes and earthquakes, and now, of course, the COVID-19. So in other words, the indicators themselves present a system for identifying potential risks and possible action, which ultimately improves decision-making in tourism planning and management, with the objective of reducing future risks to the tourism sector. Now, having said all that, we at the Ministry of Tourism have begun the process of identifying possible sustainable tourism indicators for a pilot on measuring sustainable tourism. Now, under the economic dimension, we have identified indicators such as employment, visitor expenditure, contribution to GDP, of course, visitor arrivals, labor productivity, and length of stay. For the environmental dimension, indicators include water and energy consumption, renewable sources of energy, water quality, solid waste management, recycling initiatives, and of course, protected areas. And lastly, under the sociocultural dimension, the indicators are things like inclusiveness, housing for tourism workers, social benefits such as pension for tourism workers, and of course, decent work. Now, in terms of our approach, we understand that the measurement of tourism's sustainability is largely predicated on the methods and recommendations from the major tourism organizations with responsibility for development and production of statistics and indicators in the tourism sector. And so we have examined a number of existing methodologies and frameworks and recommendations on sustainable tourism indicators. So we've looked at indicators from UNWTO, from CTO and ACS. We've also looked at the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, the OECD, and of course the European statistics of the European Commission, Eurostat. And in our analysis, it is evident that although the indicators may differ somewhat in their wording and their presentation, they all have the same things in common. They have a common focus on examining the economic, the environmental, and the sociocultural indicators at different scales and different approaches. So our next steps will be to undertake a collaborative and consultative approach towards the development of the framework for measuring sustainable tourism. And this includes liaising and partnering with the relevant stakeholders at all levels to determine what data is available and the gaps that currently exist, as well as the capacity for collection. Now, the stakeholder engagement at the national level, the Ministry of Tourism will be responsible for spearheading the process and spearheading the development of the framework. And like I mentioned in my opening words, because tourism is such a cross-cutting sector, there is the need for the involvement of other key sectors and other key agencies. So we will need a consultative process to determine the methodology to be used. We already have a TSA system in place. However, there is not much of an environmental accounting system in place nationally. So therefore, we will need to determine the best approach for collecting and analyzing that data. So going forward, we will be making contact with the agencies with responsibility for statistics. That's the Statistical Institute of Jamaica, or STATIN. Agency with responsibility for planning, the PIOJ, for environment, National Environment and Planning Agency, development agencies such as the Urban Development Corporation, entities with responsibility for heritage, Jamaica National Heritage Trust, for social security, that's the ministry with responsibility for labor and social security. And of course, we can't leave out academia. So our universities will play a crucial role in our research process. So we have to partner with University of the West Indies or University of Technology. Now, the idea is to establish a technical working group or a steering committee that will provide oversight and direction to the process. Now, the importance of the measurement process as a tool for monitoring the contribution of tourism towards the achievement of the SDGs needs to be clearly understood by all stakeholders. And of course, of course, we will also be constantly engaging with the UNWTO to provide us with any assistance or capacity building and direction. Now, so to conclude and to wrap up, we know that there's a strong need to adequately define the parameters and indicators for measuring sustainable tourism. That is a given. The process, however, is hinged on the broader UNWTO's MST framework, which is just a first step towards an integrated approach towards measuring sustainable tourism in Jamaica. And we understand that there will always be a need for more and better data. And so we have to ensure that our data collection methods are robust and effective. And finally, there has to be wide stakeholder involvement and political buy-in across all sectors and all levels for this process to be truly effective. So that's my presentation for today. Thank you very much. If anyone has any questions, they can feel free to let me know. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Osborne, again, for another excellent presentation. I think your message is key in the context of measuring sustainability of tourism. Stakeholder involvement is a major issue, even more so maybe that at the TSA level, because it's a much wider effort where you're dealing with also environmental ministries, etc., from the social side as well. So it's a much wider effort in this sense. So I think that's one of the key takeaway messages, that is this need to coordinate within the country with many different agencies and many different fields. Thanks a lot again. I'll move on now to the last presentation we have today. We have the honor also to have some colleagues from Aruba presenting on this issue, Ms. Melanie Evans-Kelly and Marilu Figueroa. The floor is all yours.
Good afternoon. We are very excited to join you in this workshop this day about SDG and our Aruba journey. I am joined this morning by Melanie Kelly, who is Manager Strategy, Planning and Research at the Aruba Tourism Authority. Next slide, please. And my name is Marilu Figueroa. I am Policy Advisor, National Planning at the Department of Economic Affairs, and I'm also Chair of the SDG Indicator Working Group. Next slide, please. Our journey started in 2017 when the SDG Indicator Working Group was installed by ministerial decree. The working group now exists for years, and it's a joint effort between technical experts of different governmental departments and the semi-governmental sector, with the main purpose of leading and coordinating the monitoring and evaluation of the SDGs, and also are responsible for addressing the relevant issues regarding the data needed to produce the SDG indicators. In order to be able to encourage further collaboration, as have a presentation and at the same time reach our main purposes, we included the following departments in our working group: the Department of Social Affairs, Public Health, Nature and Environment, Education, Labor, Economic Affairs, the Aruba Tourism Authority, and the Central Bureau of Statistics. The SDG Indicator Working Group has continuously fostered integration of efforts between stakeholders to identify the data needs and the feasibility of indicator production. We emphasize on the importance and needs of the availability of timely quality data for policy formulation and monitoring, and I highlight timely and quality data. Our first year, 2017, is typified as a year in which we explored the global indicator framework. And we also conducted a quick scan of SDG indicators availability. Next slide, please. After the year 2017, different activities were conducted in 2018. We started with the Aruba SDG baseline measurement report, and the pie chart represents availability of SDG indicators in 2018. A represents the indicators that were being produced. B were the indicators that were not being produced at that time, but could be produced using existing data sources. And C's are indicators that could not be produced. The classification was a classification used provided by ECLAC. Now we're focusing our efforts on producing the B indicators, and in some cases, we will calculate proxies for the C indicators. Next slide, please. In 2018, we also conducted a quick scan indicator relevance for national policy. And as you can see, the majority of the indicators are relevant for national policy. Some are really relevant, others are partly relevant, but overall, they are very relevant for national policy. Next slide, please. We conducted also a feasibility study in 2018 to address the bottlenecks and needs for the production of the SDG indicators in Aruba. Using primarily UN tools and methodologies, we created the Aruban model for indicator generation assessment, named the AMIGA. And AMIGA provides a detailed mapping of indicator applicability, availability, the feasibility to produce the SDG indicators within a short period of time, the available data sources, experience bottlenecks, and availability of resources and the corresponding needs, an overview of the necessary financial investments, and a calculation of the statistical capacity to produce the SDG indicators. Next slide, please. In 2019, in collaboration with the policymakers developing the National Strategic Plan, the first phase began of localization of the SDG indicators in order to develop a national SDG indicator framework. And it is called the SDG CIFRA, which stands for the Comprehensive Indicator Framework Aruba. The efforts of Aruba Tourism Authority in the carrying capacity process have been aligned with the activities of the SDG Indicator Working Group. We're very glad for that. The National Strategic Plan, being the main vehicle of SDG implementation, focuses on the 5 SDG pillars and consists of 9 programs, one of which is the Program for Sustainable Development. Next slide, please. And year 2020 took an unexpected turn, and activities for 2020 could not be carried out according to plan. Nevertheless, a start has been made in creating a report about the sustainable development of Aruba, using time series where possible from 2000 onwards, and the development of a monitoring and evaluation framework is on the agenda. We are very glad with the SDG framework because this stimulates a unified approach and has fostered collaboration between partners. We have identified the data needs, produced baselines, and where possible produced time series. But a point of attention remains, and it is to continue focusing on the fluid integration of our efforts and also on expectation management regarding timely quality data production and sharing, better coordinated dependency, and structured data sharing agreement. Now, Melanie will present the integration of the carrying capacity study with the SDGs.
Yes, thank you, Marilu, for the kind introduction. As mentioned before, my name is Melanie Kelly. I work at the Aruba Tourism Authority. I'm the manager of strategy, research, and planning. And as mentioned by Marilu, I'll be speaking to you about how we coordinated our efforts to reach alignment with the SDG working indicator group. Just a little bit of history. In 2018, Aruba commissioned Sustainable Travel International to conduct the carrying capacity study for Aruba. The defined outputs of the study were, amongst others, to define the ideal tourism model goals, tourism flow management, and define a carrying capacity indicator framework. In the next slide, you'll see the purpose of the study. We wanted a pragmatic model, which we could continuously keep on using, that guides sustainable tourism growth, and that is economically viable, environmentally friendly, and social equitable. In the next slide, you'll see that our pragmatic model is a high-value, low-impact model, which balances the quality of the visitor experience. It balances the environmental protection and conservation, the quality of life of the residents, economic contribution of tourism sector, which are all equally important to us. In this study, we used 4 main sources of data. We first, of course, conducted our DAS research to see what indicators we have available, what data needs that we need. Also, we looked at previous studies to make sure that we incorporate insights of already previously conducted studies. We looked at the tourist input. We went to 8 sites and conducted surveys amongst our visitors. We also conducted a resident input survey, as well as we visited town hall meetings to ensure that we have a good idea of how our residents feel towards tourism. And finally, we also conducted an expert input workshop. With this, as part of the tourism carrying capacity study, the SDGs were reviewed to find synergy so that the data collection and monitoring can be aligned and efforts are doubled. We looked at a total of 16 indicators, of which 10 indicators are aligned with the SDG indicator. For each indicator, we defined the current baseline, desired condition, and threshold. And as part of the study, we defined also SDG indicators that are considered secondary. So meaning that we will be working on them or work and review and see how we can continue to work on them or incorporate them in our current model, which are emission per unit, and these are more our environmental indicators. And lastly, we also have our own data that we basically collect, which we find important, which is beach sludge, number of tourism licenses, number of international tourists, average stay over, rooms in the pipeline, and current rooms available. So all these are also part of our tourism carrying capacity study, which we collect, or is partially collected by the Central Bank of Aruba. Now, having said all this, we wanted to illustrate how ATA collaborated together with this SDG working group in order to work in a parallel way and continue to monitor tourism of Aruba. So our next step is to continue to see how can we further incorporate new SDGs indicators and make sure that even if it's carrying capacity or SDG, that these indicators are properly measured. We want to thank you so much for your attention and also thank you for the invitation.
Thank you very much, dear Marilu and Melanie. It was a great presentation as well, seeing how you put the SDG indicators right at the center of the policy needs of Aruba and how they are well aligned as well. It's excellent work, I think. So congratulations on that too. I think I know we're behind, so we're a few minutes behind. I wanted to, before closing, I wanted to share the results. I don't see any questions, so I wanted to share the results of the poll. I think they're very encouraging. The first question we had was whether countries are planning in the near future to measure the sustainability of tourism. And we got that about 74% either are already measuring it or plan to measure in the near future, which is very encouraging, I think, for the region. And also a second question was whether COVID had influenced the level of priority given to this area of measurement. And I think we can see that about 86% of respondents said that either it was before important and it's still important, or it is more important now. So I think this is also an extremely encouraging result. I noticed also, I wanted to thank Clara. She shared a link on the chat box, a message. So if you would like to join the MST effort, please feel free to join us. We've been also provided with some more material. There's going to be a lot of material that is going to be shared through these presentations that you're going to be able to access to as well. As I don't see any further questions or anyone raising I have somebody, Charisse, Aimer, I don't know, raising the hand. I don't know if they want to say something. I think she's being moved to the panelist mode now.
Charisse, you can unmute yourself and speak.
Sorry, I pressed it by accident.
Okay, no problem, no problem. Thank you anyway. So again, I apologize for going a few minutes over. We still have one last point on the program, which is a very important point, I think, as well. I also wanted to apologize to Mr. Neil Walters, the CTO Acting Secretary General, who is going to provide some final remarks to this first, I think, very successful first day of the workshop. Again, I apologize, Mr. Walters, for the delay and the extra minutes. And the floor is all yours. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. There's really no need to apologize. I'm in this for the long run as well. So I actually myself enjoyed listening to the presentations very much. Good afternoon to everyone, I should say. My role now is to just bring today to a close. So I'll try not to keep you too long, as indicated we're a little over time. First, I want to single out Mr. Manuel Butler and say thanks to him for setting the tone for these 2 days of workshop sessions. We at the CTO especially want to thank the UNWTO for partnering with us for what we see as a very important activity, and we look forward to collaborating with you more in the future. I would also like to thank all of today's presenters for sharing their knowledge and experiences with us, and indeed thank those who will come. Look forward to those who will come tomorrow. Your applications and the best practices you've shared can be replicated across the region to ensure that Caribbean tourism statistics become more robust and adaptable to the needs of its users. I also have to thank the participants because your numbers demonstrate the importance of tourism statistics to the Caribbean region. And we hope that the information that is being shared over the next 2 days will be very useful to you. Over the course of the development of Caribbean tourism, we have seen improvements in the way in which information related to tourism has been recorded and in turn reported to its key stakeholders. In the 30 years in particular, with the help of funding from international agencies such as the European Union funded CARIFORUM, the Organization of American States, and the Inter-American Development Bank, along with funding from CTO's own core budget, we at the CTO have pushed for more rapid improvement in tourism collection, recording, and reporting in line with global standards. And also national efforts in each of our countries have resulted in significant improvement in the quality of information currently being derived, especially due to a more standardized system of statistics across the Caribbean. During the last 20 years, in particular in the Caribbean, the proliferation of digital technology and internet access has further improved timeliness and accuracy, mainly via the conversion from manual processes to more efficient ways of making inputs into the statistical systems. While we have seen these improvements as noted before, even more can be done. In fact, while there is significant focus on key indicators such as arrivals and visitor expenditure, tourism data can be used for many more diverse purposes. And we must challenge ourselves to see the development of tourism statistics in the region as a dynamic process. The use of digital technology affords us the ability to quickly amend all phases of the tourism statistics process. In addition to the development programs and policies related to tourism statistics, some attention must be paid now to having a regular review to ensure compatibility with established standards and to ensure that the changing needs of the sector and related sectors are met. Tourism data is even more important in terms of how it feeds directly into the development of national economic policy. Indeed, like other economic sectors, there's need for continued improvement and development of the systems which collect, record, and report on tourism information and statistics. Because of the importance of tourism in most of our economies and the need to base national fiscal decisions on the results of tourism and its impact on the economy, the development of systems like TSAs has become even more necessary. Previous natural disasters in the region, and I refer mainly to those in 2017 and 2019, and the COVID-19 pandemic have brought sharply home to all of us the crippling effect that a lack of tourism activity can and is having on our economies. While the TSA development process is a long-term one, the creation of national strategies to reach TSA-ready status can be very beneficial in terms of improving tourism and tourism-related statistics. And finally, activities such as this one and forums facilitated by sub-regional groupings such as CARICOM and the OECS create opportunities for the sharing of ideas and best practices. Again, I refer to the COVID-19 pandemic, which has brought sharply home to us something which I believe we all inherently know. That is the fact that none of us hold all of the knowledge on any subject. Collaboration, whether it is between stakeholders, countries, or regions, is a powerful force, especially in a developmental process, or like in the COVID-19 context, a recovery one. We encourage continued collaboration and firmly believe that this is critical to ensure that we move forward together towards more robust tourism statistical systems across the region. Again, I thank you, and we look forward to welcoming you again tomorrow for what promises to be another very informative session. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Walters. With this, I think we can close the first day and we can meet up again tomorrow. Thank you very much, Mr. Walters. Thank you very much, the whole team in CTO, in the UNWTO. And thank you very much, especially the presenters as well, and the countries that participate, that presented. Thank you very much, and we'll see you tomorrow again.